The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Warp fields bend spacetime in predictable ways. Transporters convert matter to energy and back again following strict quantum rules. Even the most exotic phenomena, subspace anomalies, temporal distortions, Q's apparent omnipotence, can be measured, analyzed, catalogued. But what happens when something appears that operates on principles from a universe that shouldn't exist? When two beings arrive whose very biology mocks everything we know about evolution, energy conservation, and the limits of flesh and bone. The USS Enterprise D was conducting a routine survey of the Epsilon Draconis sector when Lieutenant Commander Data's sensors detected the impossible. "Captain, I am reading a subspace distortion at bearing 270 Mark III, Data reported from Ops, his positronic brain processing readings that made no logical sense. The distortion is expanding at an exponential rate. Energy signature does not match any known phenomenon in Federation databases." Captain Jean-Luc Picard rose from his command chair, tugging his uniform tunic down in that familiar gesture of preparation. 20 years in Starfleet had taught him that unknown phenomenon usually meant danger, mystery, or both. On screen. The view screen shifted to show a tear in space itself. Not the swirling vortex of a wormhole or the geometric precision of a spatial rift, but something that looked like reality had been ripped apart by enormous hands. Crackling energy the color of lightning during a storm poured from the wound in spacetime, and through it, two shapes tumbled into normal space. Humanoid. Definitely humanoid. "Shields up," Picard ordered. Red alert. The Enterprise's battle lights shifted to crimson as the two figures arrested their tumble with impossible grace. They hung in the void of space. No suits, no visible propulsion systems, just floating as naturally as if they were suspended in water. The male wore blue and red with a distinctive diamond-shaped symbol on his chest. The female, similar colors and symbol, her blonde hair somehow undisturbed by the vacuum of space. "Captain," Data said, his tone carrying that precise quality of controlled astonishment that only an android could manage, "they are surviving in hard vacuum without protection. Life signs are extraordinary. Cardiovascular systems operating at efficiency levels 300% above any known humanoid species. Cellular structure appears to be absorbing and storing solar radiation at impossible rates. And sir," he paused, recalibrating his sensors. "They are looking directly at us." Indeed they were. Across the kilometers of void, the male figure's gaze locked onto the Enterprise's bridge, as if he could see through the hull itself. "Impossible," breathed Commander William Riker from his position at Picard's right hand. "Nothing survives direct vacuum exposure. Not without technology. Apparently, number one, we have encountered something that rewrites that particular rule." Picard stepped toward the view screen, studying the two beings. They appeared confused, disoriented. The female was gesturing urgently to the male, pointing toward what must have been their point of origin. But the rift was already collapsing, folding in on itself with violent bursts of energy. "The subspace anomaly is destabilizing," Data reported. "Collapse imminent." The male figure made a decision. He took the female's hand, and together they flew, with no visible means of propulsion, toward the Enterprise. The speed was staggering. Data's fingers moved across his console in a blur. "They are accelerating to 0.85 sublight. Intercept in 12 seconds. Evasive." Picard began, but stopped. They weren't attacking. The two beings stopped precisely 50 meters from the Enterprise's hull, floating there in the void, waiting. "They want to come aboard," Counselor Deanna Troi said from her seat beside the captain. Her empathic abilities were registering something that made her lean forward with wonder. "Captain, I sense confusion, yes, but also hope. Determination. And something else, power. Not hostile power, but potential. Like standing next to a fusion reactor that's barely contained." Picard made a decision that would alter the course of Federation history. Mr. Worf, lower shields. Transporter Room 3, lock onto those two signatures and beam them directly to sickbay. Full biohazard protocols. Captain, I must protest, Worf began from tactical, his Klingon instincts screaming warnings. Noted, Lieutenant. But they could have attacked us. Instead, they're asking for help. Picard returned to his command chair. Let's extend the hand of friendship before assuming hostility. Engage. The two figures shimmered and vanished in the familiar sparkle of the transporter beam. Behind them, the subspace rift collapsed with a flash of radiation that sent the Enterprise's shields flaring. Whatever doorway had opened between universes was now sealed. In sickbay, Dr. Beverly Crusher was running her medical tricorder over two beings who should not exist and found her instruments screaming contradictions. The male was tall, powerfully built, with dark hair and eyes of startling blue. The female, younger perhaps, blonde and athletic, with the same impossible physiology. Cellular density is off the charts, Crusher muttered, watching her readings. Their cells are acting like organic solar batteries. Heart rates elevated but steady, they're stressed but adapting. And their bone structure. She looked up at them, her physician's instinct overriding her amazement. You're not from around here, are you? The male spoke, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. No. We're not. My name is Kal-El. On my world, they call me Superman. This is my cousin, Kara Zor-El, Supergirl. He glanced around the sterile environment of sickbay, then at the view screen showing the now empty space where the rift had been. And I think we're very far from home. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. Picard entered sickbay moments later, flanked by Riker, Data, and Worf, the latter keeping one hand conspicuously near his phaser. The captain's expression was diplomatic but cautious, the face of a man who'd learned that first impressions could be deceiving. I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You've entered United Federation of Planets Space. I'd like to welcome you, but first, I need to understand what we're dealing with. You survived hard vacuum without protection. You flew without propulsion. And according to our sensors, you're generating energy signatures that shouldn't be possible for organic life. He paused, letting his words settle. So tell me, Kal-El, where exactly? Superman exchanged a glance with Supergirl. She nodded slightly, still taking in their surroundings with eyes that seemed to see everything. Krypton, Superman said. We're from a planet called Krypton. Or we were. Our world was destroyed. We've been living on Earth, a planet in what we called the Milky Way galaxy. But something went wrong. An experiment with Kryptonian technology and what you might call dimensional harmonics. He gestured to where the rift had been. It opened a doorway we couldn't control. And now you're here, Picard finished. In what we also call the Milky Way galaxy, but clearly not the same version of it you remember. Data stepped forward, his curious android nature overcoming protocol. Fascinating. You are suggesting a parallel universe scenario, a quantum reality where different evolutionary and historical paths were taken. The subspace rift was not merely spatial but dimensional. That's one way to put it, Supergirl said, speaking for the first time. Her voice carried an edge of worry. The question is, can you help us get back? Picard's expression became grave. That, I'm afraid, is a question that may not have a simple answer. But you have my word, we will try. What the captain didn't say, what none of them yet understood, was that the arrival of two Kryptonians in the Federation universe would challenge everything they believed about power, responsibility, and the delicate balance between intervention and restraint. On his throne of chaos, Q felt something shift in the continuum, two new variables entering his favorite testing ground. A smile crossed his omnipotent features. "Oh, this is going to be delicious," he murmured to the void. And in the shadowed halls of Romulan space, a Tal Shiar operative reviewed sensor logs from a long-range listening post. 2 beings. Surviving vacuum. Power readings beyond comprehension. The operative sent an encrypted message to Romulus with a simple recommendation: acquire. Study. Duplicate. The game was beginning. The Enterprise's conference room had hosted delegations from hundreds of species across dozens of star systems. Picard had negotiated with Klingon, reasoned with Romulans, and somehow survived conversations with Q. But he'd never quite felt the weight of presence that filled the room now as Superman and Supergirl sat across from him and his senior staff. It wasn't intimidation, exactly. Both Kryptonians carried themselves with a humility that contradicted their obvious power. But there was something in the way they moved, the carefully controlled strength in every gesture, the sense that they were constantly holding back, that reminded everyone present they were dealing with forces beyond their experience. "Let me see if I understand correctly," Picard said, his fingers steepled before him. "Your cells naturally absorb and process stellar radiation, converting it into what you describe as superpowers. Strength, speed, flight, and various sensory abilities far beyond any known humanoid species. That's the simplified version," Superman confirmed. "On Earth, our Earth, we lived under a yellow sun similar to yours. The solar radiation there gave us these abilities. But here..." He flexed his hand, frowning slightly. "Something's different. Weaker. Like trying to breathe through a filter." Data had been studying his tricorder readings with intense fascination. "I believe I may have a hypothesis. The Federation employs artificial gravity systems throughout our vessels and installations. These systems generate a low-level subspace field that maintains 0.98 Earth standard gravity. This field appears to be interfering with your cellular absorption process." He looked up, his yellow eyes gleaming with scientific excitement. "Additionally, your exposure to stellar radiation is currently filtered through our deflector shields and hull plating. The wavelength spectrum reaching you is fundamentally altered. So we're operating at partial capacity," Supergirl said, understanding immediately. She was younger than her cousin, Picard noted, but her tactical mind was sharp. "How partial?" "Based on my analysis of your cellular activity compared to what should be theoretically optimal, I estimate you are currently functioning at approximately 85 to 90% efficiency." Riker let out a low whistle. "And you're still able to survive hard vacuum and fly faster than most shuttlecraft. What were you capable of at full capacity?" The Kryptonians exchanged a look that spoke volumes, a shared memory of power that perhaps they themselves found difficult to articulate. "Enough," Superman said quietly. "Enough to move mountains. Stop tsunamis. Catch falling spacecraft." He paused. "Enough to be dangerous if we lose control." Worf had been silent throughout the briefing, his dark eyes tracking every movement the Kryptonians made. Now he leaned forward, his deep voice cutting through the scientific discussion. "You speak of power that could destroy starships, yet you claim to use it to help others. On QNOS, we have a saying, trust is earned in drops but lost in rivers. How do we know you are not simply waiting for an opportune moment to strike?" "Lieutenant," Picard began, but Superman held up a hand. "No, he's right to ask." The Kryptonian met Worf's challenging gaze directly. "Where we come from, that question has been asked 1,000 times. What's to stop someone with my power from becoming a dictator? A conqueror?" He leaned back, and for a moment, the weight of years showed in his expression. "The only answer I can give is this: I was raised by good people who taught me that power without responsibility is tyranny. Every day, I choose to use what I have to protect, not to rule. That choice is all I have to offer you." "A choice that must be made every day," Picard said softly, recognizing something of himself in the man's words. "Yes, I understand that burden. Counselor Troy had been observing silently, her empathic senses reading the emotional currents in the room. Captain, if I may, I sense absolute sincerity from both of them. There's no deception, no hidden agenda. Just. She struggled for the right words. Displacement. They're far from home, uncertain about their place here, but their fundamental nature is protective, not aggressive. That is reassuring, Counselor, but it brings us to a practical question. Picard turned to Data. Can we return them to their point of origin? The android's expression, programmed to convey regret, said everything before his words did. The subspace rift has completely collapsed. To recreate it would require understanding the precise quantum signature of their origin universe, the exact dimensional frequency, and then generating enough energy to tear through the barriers between realities. With our current technology. He shook his head. The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of a Galaxy-class starship's warp core by several orders of magnitude. Supergirl's face fell. So we're trapped here. Not necessarily, Data said. There may be species or technologies within Federation space that could assist. The Trill have some experience with temporal and dimensional phenomena. The Cytherians possess knowledge far beyond our own. And there are anomalies throughout the galaxy, wormholes, subspace fissures, that might provide pathways home. But those are long-term possibilities, Riker said, understanding the implication. In the meantime, we have two individuals aboard who are, frankly, walking weapons of mass destruction. No offense intended. None taken, Superman said. It's a fair assessment. What do you suggest? Picard stood, moving to the viewport that showed the infinite spread of stars beyond. The United Federation of Planets was founded on principles of peaceful coexistence and mutual assistance. We don't imprison beings simply because they possess power. If we did, we'd have to lock up every Vulcan with telepathic abilities or every Betazoid empath. He turned back to face them. What I propose is this. You remain aboard the Enterprise as our guests while we search for a way to return you home. In exchange, you respect our laws, our customs, and our authority structure. You are not Starfleet officers, but you will defer to Starfleet command while aboard a Starfleet vessel. That seems reasonable, Superman said, but Picard heard the unspoken question. You're wondering what happens if we encounter a situation where someone needs help, the captain said. Where your powers could save lives, but our regulations might forbid intervention. The thought had crossed my mind, Superman admitted. Then we'll deal with those situations as they arise, with open communication and mutual respect. Picard returned to his seat. I won't lie to you, the Federation operates under a doctrine called the Prime Directive. It forbids us from interfering with the natural development of pre-warp civilizations. There will be times when we cannot help, even when help would be easy to provide. That philosophy may clash with your instincts. Supergirl frowned. You're saying you'd let people die to preserve some abstract principle. I'm saying that history has taught us that interference, even well-intentioned, often causes more harm than good in the long term. Picard's voice was gentle but firm. The Prime Directive isn't cruelty, it's humility. The recognition that we don't have all the answers and that every civilization deserves the right to find its own path, even if that path includes hardship. That's going to be difficult, Superman said honestly. Everything in me says to help when I see suffering. Then we will have difficult conversations, Picard replied. But I have faith that reasonable beings can find common ground. A chime interrupted the moment. Bridge to Captain Picard, came the voice of the officer on duty. Picard here. Sir, we're receiving a priority message from Starfleet Command. Admiral Nechayev wishes to speak with you immediately. And Captain, the officer hesitated. The transmission is encrypted with code Omega clearance. Picard's expression hardened. Code Omega meant classified information of the highest order. The kind that ended careers or started wars. I'll take it in my ready room. Picard out. He turned to his guests. If you'll excuse me. Commander Riker will show you to guest quarters. I trust you'll find them comfortable. As Picard left, Superman watched him go with a sense of recognition. Here was a man who understood the weight of command, the burden of making impossible choices. Whatever else this universe held, at least they'd found someone who might understand what it meant to carry power you couldn't always use. In his ready room, Picard activated the view screen and found himself facing Admiral Elena Nechayev, a woman whose reputation for cold pragmatism was legendary throughout Starfleet. Admiral. Captain Picard. I've reviewed your preliminary report on the two beings you've brought aboard. Kryptonians, they call themselves. Her eyes were hard. Beings capable of surviving vacuum, flying at high sublight velocities, and demonstrating strength that could tear a starship apart. And you've decided to give them free run of the Federation flagship? I've decided to treat them as refugees in need of assistance, per Federation law and basic humanitarian principles. Humanitarian principles don't account for potential planet killers walking our corridors, Captain. Nechayev leaned forward. Starfleet intelligence wants them studied. Section 31 wants them contained. And the Federation Council is terrified of what happens if they decide to stop being friendly. Picard felt ice forming in his gut. Section 31, the ghost organization that operated in the shadows, doing the dirty work Starfleet officially denied. With respect, Admiral, they are sentient beings, not specimens to be dissected. They are unprecedented threats that we need to understand. Nechayev's voice softened slightly. I'm not ordering you to turn them over, Jean-Luc. Not yet. But I am ordering you to keep them under constant surveillance. And if they demonstrate hostile intent, even once, you are authorized to use any means necessary to neutralize the threat. The screen went dark. Picard sat in silence, staring at his reflection in the blank view screen. He'd hoped to offer the Kryptonians sanctuary. Instead, he was being ordered to treat them as potential enemies. Somewhere in the ship, Superman was probably listening to this conversation with his super hearing, understanding that in this universe, even acts of mercy came with chains attached. The guest quarters assigned to Superman and Supergirl were among the finest the Enterprise offered, spacious, comfortable, with viewport windows that showed the endless expanse of stars. But comfort was a poor substitute for home, and both Kryptonians felt the weight of their displacement like a physical thing. Superman stood at the viewport, his enhanced vision tracking distant nebulae that held no familiar constellations. Behind him, Supergirl paced with barely contained energy, her footsteps unconsciously light to avoid damaging the deck plating. You heard the Admiral's conversation, Kara said. It wasn't a question. Her cousin's superhearing could detect whispers through bulkheads and across decks. Every word, Clark confirmed, his jaw tight. Section 31. Containment protocols. They're afraid of us. Can you blame them? Kara stopped pacing, joining him at the viewport. We show up out of nowhere with abilities that break every rule their science understands. For all they know, we're the vanguard of an invasion force. Picard doesn't believe that. Picard isn't in charge of Starfleet. Kara crossed her arms. Clark, we need to face facts. This isn't our universe. These people don't know us, don't trust us, and from their perspective, they shouldn't. We're anomalies that threaten their understanding of reality. Superman turned to face her, and she saw the familiar determination in his eyes, the look that had inspired millions on their Earth, the stubborn hope that had saved worlds. Then we prove ourselves. We show them who we are through our actions. And if they don't give us the chance. Kara's voice was softer now, vulnerable. What if the next time Picard gets orders, they're not suggestions? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered because neither wanted to voice the truth. That they might have to choose between submission and becoming everything these people feared. A door chime interrupted the moment. Superman straightened. Come in. Lieutenant Commander Data entered, carrying a specialized tricorder and a PADD filled with scrolling data. I hope I am not disturbing you. Captain Picard asked me to conduct a more thorough analysis of your physiology, if you are willing. I believe understanding the precise mechanism of your abilities may help us locate a way to return you to your proper universe. And help Starfleet understand what we're capable of, Superman said, not unkindly. Data's head tilted in that uniquely android gesture of acknowledgement. That is also true. However, I should note that my primary motivation is scientific curiosity rather than tactical assessment. I am an android, a synthetic life form. My existence was once considered impossible, even threatening, to many organic beings. I understand what it is to be viewed as an anomaly. Something in his tone made Supergirl's expression soften. You're not like the others, are you? I am different, yes. I lack emotions, though I have spent considerable effort attempting to understand and simulate them. But I have learned that being different is not the same as being wrong. He activated his tricorder. Shall we begin? Over the next hour, Data conducted scans that would have made any Earth scientist weep with envy. He measured cellular density, analyzed bioelectric fields, mapped the precise mechanisms of solar energy absorption and conversion. Throughout it all, he maintained a running commentary that was both fascinating and slightly overwhelming. Your cellular structure is extraordinary, Data said, studying his readings with undisguised wonder. Each cell functions as a biological fusion reactor, storing solar energy at the quantum level. The efficiency is approximately 99.7%, far beyond any natural evolutionary development I have encountered. Kryptonian evolution took a different path, Superman explained. Our planet had a much denser gravity field and orbited a red sun. Over millions of years, our ancestors developed cellular structures capable of absorbing and storing incredible amounts of energy. Under a yellow sun like yours, that ability becomes. He gestured helplessly. Extreme. Indeed. However, I have noticed something curious. Data adjusted his tricorder settings. Your power levels are fluctuating. When you are near the viewports, exposed to unfiltered stellar radiation, your cellular efficiency increases by approximately 3%. When you move deeper into the ship, efficiency decreases. Supergirl's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. So the ship's systems are dampening our abilities. The shields, the hull, the artificial gravity, it's all interference. Precisely. Which leads to a hypothesis. If you were to spend significant time in direct sunlight, perhaps on the hull of the Enterprise, or on a planetary surface without atmospheric filtering, you might recover your full capacity. Or exceed it, Superman said quietly. Data, you need to understand something. Our powers aren't constant. They grow stronger with prolonged exposure to yellow sun radiation. Given enough time and energy, we become. He struggled for the word. Unstoppable isn't quite right, but it's close. Data processed this information with his characteristic speed. That presents an interesting philosophical question. If your abilities can grow without apparent limit, at what point do you transcend biological classification and become something approaching the Q continuum's omnipotence? We don't, Supergirl said firmly. We're not gods, Data. We're just people with extraordinary abilities. We get tired, we make mistakes, we can be hurt. It just takes more than it would for most species. But you can be hurt. Data's curiosity was clinical but not cold. What are your vulnerabilities? Superman and Supergirl exchanged glances. Trust had to start somewhere. On our Earth, there was a mineral called kryptonite, Clark explained. Radioactive fragments of our destroyed homeworld. Exposure to it weakened us, poisoned us. Enough of it could kill us. Fascinating. A specific radioactive signature that interferes with your cellular processes. I wonder if similar elements exist in this universe. Data made notes on his PADD. And what of energy-based attacks? Phaser fire, disruptors, plasma weapons? We don't know, Supergirl admitted. On our world, most conventional weapons couldn't hurt us. But your technology is different. We've never been hit by a phaser, and I'd rather not find out the hard way if they work. A logical preference. Data deactivated his tricorder. I believe I have sufficient data for preliminary analysis. With your permission, I would like to conduct some controlled experiments, exposing you to various energy wavelengths, testing your reactions to different gravitational fields, perhaps simulating higher solar radiation exposure in a holodeck environment. Why are you really doing this? Superman asked suddenly. You said curiosity, but there's more to it, isn't there? Data paused, and for a moment, something almost like emotion flickered across his synthetic features. Captain Picard asked me to determine whether you pose a threat to the Federation. My analysis will influence how you are treated, whether you are given freedom or placed under tighter restrictions. I believed you deserved honesty about that fact. And what have you determined? Kara asked, tension coiling in her shoulders. That you are the most powerful beings I have ever encountered who are also among the most careful, Data replied. Every movement you make is precisely controlled. When you gestured during our conversation, you did so with exactly enough force to move your hand but not enough to create a shock wave. When Supergirl paces, her footfalls register at .003 newtons of force, approximately equivalent to a feather landing on the deck. You are constantly regulating your strength, every moment of every day. That level of self-control suggests beings who are acutely aware of their power and deeply concerned about causing harm. He looked between them with those unsettling yellow eyes. My preliminary assessment is that you are not a threat, provided the Federation does not give you reason to become one. And what would constitute a reason? Superman's voice was carefully neutral. That, Data said, is a question I hope we never need to answer. The door chime sounded again. This time, it was Counselor Troy, her empathic senses already reading the room's tension before she fully entered. I hope I'm not interrupting. The captain thought you might benefit from speaking with the ship's counselor. Adapting to a new reality can be challenging. That's putting it mildly, Kara said, but she gestured to the seating area. Please, sit. Though I should warn you. If you're telepathic, our minds might be difficult to read. Troy smiled, settling into a chair with practiced grace. I'm empathic, not telepathic. I sense emotions rather than reading thoughts. And yes, you both register as complex. There's an undercurrent of stress and displacement, as I'd expect, but also something else. Guilt? No, not quite. More like burden. The burden of power, Superman said, understanding immediately. The knowledge that you can help but sometimes shouldn't. That every choice you make affects countless lives. Ah. Troy's expression showed comprehension. You're not just adapting to a new universe. You're wondering what role you'll play in it. Whether you have the right to intervene when you see suffering. In our universe, that question was settled, Supergirl said. We helped because we could, because it was right. But here, with your Prime Directive and your rules about non-interference. She shook her head. How do you stand by and watch when you have the power to change things? Because changing things isn't always improvement, Troy said gently. The Federation learned that lesson the hard way, across centuries of contact with other species. We found that imposing our solutions, even with the best intentions, often robbed civilizations of their own growth, their own triumphs. The Prime Directive isn't about cruelty, it's about respecting the right of every species to find their own path. Even when that path leads to suffering? Clark asked. Even then. Because the alternative, deciding that we know better, that our power gives us the right to reshape other cultures, that path leads to imperialism, no matter how benevolent the intent. Troy leaned forward. But I sense that you already understand this on some level. That the question troubles you because you've faced similar dilemmas before. Superman was quiet for a long moment. There was a time on our Earth when I tried to do too much. To solve every problem, prevent every disaster. I nearly broke trying to save everyone. I had to learn that I couldn't be everywhere, couldn't fix everything, and that sometimes people needed to save themselves, even if it was harder, even if it cost more. Then you already understand the wisdom behind the Prime Directive, Troy said. The challenge will be applying that wisdom when every instinct screams at you to act. An alert tone sounded through the ship's intercom. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Unidentified vessels approaching on intercept course. The Kryptonians were on their feet instantly, decades of crisis response overriding their uncertainty. Data was already moving toward the door, his android reflexes bringing him to the corridor in seconds. We should get to the bridge, Superman said, following. Troy caught his arm, or tried to. Her hand bounced off his bioelectric aura like she'd grabbed steel. You're not Starfleet. You don't have a battle station. No, Supergirl said, her eyes already glowing faintly with heat vision as her powers unconsciously surged. But if there's a fight coming, they're going to need us. Whether they want to admit it or not. On the bridge, Picard stood at the center of organized chaos, his crew moving with the precision of trained professionals responding to threat. The view screen showed 3 ships of unfamiliar design, sleek and predatory, moving in perfect formation. Romulan Warbirds, Worf announced, his voice grim. Diridex class. They're powering weapons. In Federation space, Riker said incredulously. That's a direct treaty violation. Hail them, Picard ordered. The response was immediate. A Romulan commander appeared on screen, her features sharp and calculating beneath severe bangs of black hair. Enterprise. You will surrender the 2 beings you recovered from the subspace anomaly. They are now property of the Romulan Star Empire. Property? Picard's voice was ice. They are sentient beings, Commander. The Federation does not trade in slaves. Then you will all die defending them. The screen went dark. 3 Romulan Warbirds opened fire. The Enterprise shuddered as emerald disruptor fire hammered against her shields. Picard gripped his command chair, watching the shield indicators drop with each successive impact. Shields at 78%, Worf reported, his fingers dancing across tactical controls. Returning fire. Orange phaser beams lanced out from the Enterprise's arrays, striking the lead Warbird's shields. The Romulan vessel barely registered the impact, its own defensive systems far more robust than Starfleet's standard cruiser armaments could easily overcome. They're concentrating fire on our port shields, data called from Ops. Attempting to create a breach point for boarding parties. Evasive pattern Delta 4, Picard ordered. The Enterprise banked hard, her impulse engines flaring as she tried to present fresh shield facings to the attacking ships. But 3 Warbirds against 1 Galaxy-class starship, the mathematics were brutally clear. The turbolift doors hissed open. Superman and Supergirl stepped onto the bridge, followed by an exasperated Counselor Troy. Every eye turned toward them for a split second before training overrode curiosity and the crew returned to their stations. Captain, Superman said, moving to stand near the command chair. We can help. This is a Starfleet matter, Picard said, but another barrage of disruptor fire punctuated his words. Shields at 61%. Supergirl's eyes were fixed on the viewscreen, tracking the Warbirds' attack patterns with tactical precision that would have impressed any Starfleet officer. They're not trying to destroy you. They're trying to disable your shields and beam aboard. They want us, and they're willing to risk war with the Federation to get us. The question is why, Riker said, steadying himself as the ship rocked again. What do the Romulans want with you? Data's console chirped urgently. Captain, I am detecting unusual scanning frequencies from the lead Warbird. They are conducting detailed biological scans of the Kryptonians. And sir, he turned, his android features grave. I am detecting similar scan signatures from a Romulan listening post in the Epsilon Draconis sector. They have been monitoring us since the Kryptonians arrived. Understanding dawned on Picard's face like ice water. They witnessed your arrival. Saw you survive vacuum, saw the energy readings. The Tal Shiar isn't here for prisoners, they're here for genetic samples. They want to replicate us, Superman said quietly. The horror in his voice was unmistakable. Create Romulan super soldiers. Shields at 49%, Worf announced. We cannot sustain this assault much longer. Picard's mind raced through options, each one leading to either surrender or the death of his crew. The Romulans had violated Federation space, committed an act of war, but that wouldn't matter if the Enterprise was destroyed. Starfleet Command would never know what happened here. The Tal Shiar would collect their prizes, and Kryptonian DNA would become the Romulan Empire's newest weapon. Unless he played the one card they weren't expecting. Mr. Worf, cease fire. Drop shields. Captain. Multiple voices spoke at once. Drop shields, Picard repeated, his voice carrying absolute authority. He turned to Superman. I'm trusting you to understand what needs to happen here. Can you disable those ships without destroying them? Superman met his gaze, and in that moment, Picard saw the weight of 1,000 similar decisions reflected in those blue eyes. Yes. But it means revealing exactly what we're capable of. They already know what you are. Show them why trying to weaponize you would be the Empire's worst mistake. Captain, this is madness, Worf began, but Picard held up a hand. Number 1, you have the con. Mr. Worf, once our shields are down, transport Superman and Supergirl to the coordinates they designate. Picard looked at the Kryptonians. Stop them. But remember, Starfleet doesn't execute prisoners, and I expect you to honor that principle. Supergirl nodded, already moving toward the transport coordinates data was feeding her. Non-lethal takedown. Understood. Shields down, Worf said, the words bitter in his mouth. Transporter ready. Superman placed a hand on Picard's shoulder, gentle, but the captain felt the barely restrained strength behind it. Thank you for trusting us. Don't make me regret it. Energize. The Kryptonians dissolved in twin columns of light. 3 seconds later, they materialized in the void between the Enterprise and the Romulan Warbirds. On the bridge of the lead Warbird, Commander Tvau watched her viewscreen with predatory satisfaction as the Enterprise's shields dropped. Perfect. They're surrendering. Prepare boarding parties. Her sensor officer's shout cut her off. Commander. 2 humanoid signatures in open space. No life support, no vessels. They're just floating. What? Tvau spun to the view screen, and her blood went cold. The 2 beings from the Federation ship hung in the vacuum like ancient gods of war. The male's cape, absurd, theatrical, impossible, billowed despite the lack of atmosphere, as if reality itself bent around him. The female's blonde hair spread like a corona of light, her eyes glowing with building energy. All weapons, fire at, Tvau never finished the command. Superman moved. One moment he was 50 kilometers from the lead Warbird. The next, he was alongside it, his fist impacting the ship's forward disruptor array with precisely calculated force. The metal crumpled like paper, the weapon system sparking and dying. He flowed along the hull faster than the ship's sensors could track, each strike perfectly measured, destroying weapons, disabling shield emitters, but leaving the hull intact, leaving the crew alive. Supergirl took the second Warbird. She wove through space in a pattern that looked like dance, her heat vision lancing out in controlled bursts that sliced through disruptor cannons without penetrating to the interior spaces. When a spread of photon torpedoes launched at her, she caught them, actually caught them, one in each hand, and crushed them before they could arm, the conventional explosives flaring harmlessly against her invulnerable skin. The third Warbird's commander had time to scream, "Cloak," before Superman was there, his hands gripping the ship's cloaking device housing. He squeezed, and the delicate equipment that bent light and sensor beams shattered like glass. The Warbird flickered into visibility, its primary defensive advantage gone in seconds. On the Enterprise bridge, the crew watched in stunned silence. "Impossible," Worf breathed. "No one moves that fast. No one is that strong." "Our sensors can barely track them," Data said, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "They are moving at velocities exceeding 0.99 sublight, changing direction with accelerations that should generate enough force to liquefy organic tissue. Yet they show no signs of strain." Riker leaned forward in the command chair, watching Superman systematically dismantle 3 of the Romulan Empire's most powerful warships as casually as a technician performing maintenance. "My God. If they wanted to, they could tear the Enterprise apart with their bare hands." "Yes," Picard said quietly. "But they won't. That's what makes them extraordinary." In space, Superman finished with the 3rd Warbird's weapons and flew back to hover before its bridge viewport. Behind him, Supergirl had positioned herself between the disabled Romulan ships and the Enterprise, a living shield radiating barely contained power. Superman looked directly at Commander Tvau through the transparent aluminum, knowing she could see him, knowing every Romulan on that bridge was recording this moment. He spoke, his voice carrying through the calm frequencies. "We don't want war. We don't want to hurt anyone. But if you come after us, if you try to weaponize what we are," he gestured to the 3 disabled Warbirds, to the sparking ruins of once mighty weapon systems. "This is what mercy looks like. The next time might be different." He turned and flew back toward the Enterprise, Supergirl falling in beside him. Behind them, 3 Romulan Warbirds hung dead in space, their crews alive but utterly defeated. "Transporter room, beam them back to the bridge," Riker ordered. Superman and Supergirl materialized to find the entire bridge crew staring at them with expressions ranging from awe to fear to calculation. Worf's hand hovered near his phaser, but Picard's calm voice cut through the tension. "Report. Casualties?" "None, sir," Superman said. "I monitored their life signs throughout. Some minor injuries from crew members being thrown by the impacts, but nothing critical. Their ships are disabled but intact. They can limp home. And they'll report everything they saw to Romulan High Command," Data observed. "Within hours, every major power in the quadrant will know what you are capable of." "That was the point," Supergirl said. "Better they know what they're dealing with than keep testing us until someone gets killed." Picard studied them both, seeing the careful control in every movement, the power held in check by will alone. "You could have destroyed those ships. Killed everyone aboard. Instead, you showed restraint even while demonstrating overwhelming force." He nodded slowly. "Well done." "Sir," Worf said, his voice tight. "We should consider that the Romulans are not the only threat. Word of this will spread. The Klingon, the Cardassians, even the Borg, they will all want to either recruit or eliminate these 2. "I know, Lieutenant. Which is why we need to find them a way home as quickly as possible." Picard activated his comm bridge to engineering. "Mr. LaForge, report to the observation lounge. Bring everything you have on subspace rifts, dimensional barriers, and exotic energy phenomena. We have work to do." But even as the senior staff gathered to begin researching escape options, a priority transmission came through from Starfleet Command. Admiral Nechayev's face appeared on the screen, and her expression promised storms ahead. "Captain Picard. Explain to me how 2 beings we've known about for less than 8 hours just defeated 3 Romulan Warbirds in under 2 minutes. And explain why we're not refugees anymore. We're a resource to be controlled or a threat to be eliminated." "Not while I have command of this vessel," Picard said firmly. "But I won't lie to you, there are forces within Starfleet and beyond who will see you as both opportunity and danger. And after today's display, those forces will be mobilizing. In the shadows of subspace, a Klingon bird of prey monitored the Enterprise's movements, its commander sending encrypted reports to the High Council. Warriors with such power would be worthy allies, or glorious enemies. In a secure facility on Earth, Section 31 operatives watched the sensor logs with clinical interest, already planning contingencies. Power of this magnitude couldn't be allowed to remain uncontrolled. And in a dimension outside normal space, Q watched with growing amusement as his favorite testing ground acquired two new variables that promised to make things infinitely more interesting. "Oh, Jean-Luc," he murmured to the cosmos. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." The game was accelerating. The observation lounge had become a makeshift war room, its elegant table covered with pads displaying subspace topology models, dimensional frequency charts, and theoretical physics equations that would have given most scientists headaches. Chief Engineer Geordi LaForge stood at the wall display, his visor allowing him to see the electromagnetic spectrum in ways that made the impossible merely improbable. "The problem," Geordi explained, highlighting a rotating three-dimensional model of the collapsed rift, "is that we're talking about breaching the dimensional barrier, the actual fabric that separates parallel universes. It's not like punching through subspace or creating a wormhole. Those are just shortcuts through our universe. This is crossing into a completely different reality with potentially different physical laws." Superman leaned forward, studying the display with the keen intelligence that people often missed beneath the heroic exterior. "When we came through, the rift was created by an interaction between Kryptonian technology and what we thought was a natural phenomenon. But now I'm wondering, what if it wasn't natural? What if something pulled us through?" "An intriguing hypothesis," Data said from his position at the table. "However, our sensor logs show no indication of external manipulation. The rift appears to have been a spontaneous quantum fluctuation amplified by your experimental technology." "Appears to be," Supergirl said, her journalist's instincts catching the qualifier. "But you're not certain." "Certainty in dimensional physics is elusive," Data admitted. Picard listened to the exchange, his fingers steepled before him in that characteristic gesture of concentration. 2 days had passed since the Romulan incident, and the political fallout was escalating faster than anticipated. The Klingon Empire had sent an official request to meet the warriors who defeated 3 Warbirds. The Cardassian Union was making discreet inquiries through back channels. And Admiral Nechayev had made it abundantly clear that Starfleet Command wanted the Kryptonians off the Enterprise before they sparked an interstellar incident. "How long until you can generate a new rift?" Picard asked Geordi. The engineer's expression was grim. "With the Enterprise's warp core? We're talking months of preparation, and even then, the chances of opening a rift to the correct parallel universe are..." He consulted his PADD. "Approximately 0.003%. We'd more likely tear a hole in our own spacetime and kill everyone within a few light years." "Unacceptable," Picard said firmly. "There might be another option," Data interjected. "The Bajoran wormhole. It is a stable gateway to the Gamma Quadrant, maintained by entities the Bajorans call the Prophets. These beings exist outside linear time and have demonstrated the ability to manipulate spacetime in ways that defy Federation science. If any intelligence in known space could open a pathway to a parallel universe, it would be them." "You want us to ask gods for help," Supergirl said, a wry smile touching her lips. "That's actually not as strange as it sounds, given our experience. The prophets are not gods," Data clarified. "They are non-corporeal life forms existing in a realm of nonlinear time. But they have shown interest in corporeal affairs and have aided the Federation in the past." Riker leaned back in his chair, skeptical. "They've also been unpredictable and cryptic. There's no guarantee they'd even acknowledge the request, let alone help." "It's still our best option," Geordi said. "The alternative is hoping we stumble across another naturally occurring rift, which could take years." A calm chirp interrupted the discussion. "Bridge to Captain Picard. Picard here." Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the IKS Bordas, a Klingon Vorcha-class attack cruiser. They're requesting permission to dock and send an envoy aboard. The message is insistent. Picard exchanged glances with Riker. How insistent? They've been matching our course for the past hour, sir. And the commander specifically requests an audience with the Kryptonian warriors. His exact words were, "We would meet these legends in person, or we will meet them in battle to test their worth." Superman sighed. I was wondering when this would happen. You expected the Klingon? Worf asked, his tone carrying a mixture of pride and concern for his people's reputation. Warrior culture recognizes strength, Supergirl said. We humiliated the Romulans. The Klingon want to know if we're potential allies or worthy enemies. Worf's expression showed approval despite his concerns. You understand Klingon thinking. That is, good. But you should know that Klingon do not always accept words without proof. They may challenge you to combat. Then we'll decline, Superman said simply. Declining a Klingon challenge is considered cowardice, Worf warned. It would invite contempt, possibly aggression. Then we'll have to find another way to earn their respect, Clark said. I won't fight someone just to prove I'm stronger. Picard made his decision. Inform the Bordas will receive their envoy in 1 hour. Counselor Troy, I'll need you present to read emotional undercurrents. Lieutenant Worf, you'll brief our guests on Klingon protocol. He turned to the Kryptonians. And you too, try not to start an interstellar incident. No promises, Kara said, but her smile took the edge off the words. An hour later, the transporter room received 3 Klingon warriors who brought the scent of blood wine and the aura of barely contained violence with them. Their leader, Commander Koloth, was a scarred veteran whose eyes held the gleam of someone who'd seen 1,000 battles and hungered for 1,000 more. Captain Picard, Koloth rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. I bring greetings from Chancellor Gowron and the High Council. We have heard tales of warriors who defeat Romulan Warbirds with their bare hands. We would see these warriors. They are my guests, Commander, not entertainment, Picard said carefully. Then they are warriors without courage, hiding behind Starfleet protection. Kolotha's lips curled into a challenge. Or are the stories lies? Did Federation trickery defeat the Romulans, not personal prowess? Superman stepped forward before Picard could respond. He'd watched Worf's briefing on Klingon culture, understood the dance of honor and challenge that governed their interactions. I am Kal-El. This is Kara Zor-El. We defeated the Romulans because they threatened innocence. Not for glory, not for honor, because it was necessary. Koloth studied him with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Necessity. A weak word. Where is the honor in necessity? Where is the glory? There is no glory in battle, Supergirl said, her voice hard. Only in what you fight for. The Klingon warriors bristled at the perceived insult, hands moving toward DK Togs. But Koloth held up a hand, stopping them. Something in the female's eyes intrigued him, not fear, not bravado, but the absolute certainty of someone who'd faced death and emerged stronger. You speak like a warrior, but your words are soft, Koloth said. Perhaps you need to remember what it means to fight. I challenge you to a test of strength, not to death, but to first blood. Prove you are worthy of the Empire's respect. We won't fight you, Superman said firmly. Then you are cowards, and the Empire has no use for cowards. Koloth turned to leave. Wait. The word came from Worf, and every eye turned to the Enterprise's tactical officer. He stood at attention, his internal conflict visible on his face, loyalty to his captain, his Starfleet oath, but also the deep-rooted Klingon need for honor. Commander Koloth, there are other ways to measure strength. The Kryptonians' power is beyond question. Perhaps a different test. Koloth paused. Speak. Worf gestured to a nearby cargo container, industrial equipment used for antimatter containment. It weighed several metric tons. In traditional Klingon culture, warriors sometimes prove themselves through tests of endurance rather than combat. Let them demonstrate their strength without bloodshed. Lifting weights? Koloth scoffed. A child's game. Then add a challenge worthy of warriors, Worf suggested. Let them support this weight while answering questions of honor and philosophy. Weakness of spirit shows in the body's failure. It is an old test, used before the Empire expanded to the stars. Koloth considered this, his warrior's pragmatism overcoming his desire for violence. Very well. But I choose the questions, and they must answer truthfully. If they fail, if they drop the weight or speak falsely, they are proven weak. Superman looked at the cargo container, then at Picard. The captain gave the slightest nod, permission granted. Agreed. What followed was perhaps the strangest cultural exchange in Federation history. Superman stood with the multi-ton container held overhead in one hand, his expression calm despite supporting weight that would crush any normal humanoid. Koloth circled him like a general inspecting troops, firing questions about honor, duty, sacrifice. You say you fight for others, not for glory. But glory is what gives meaning to a warrior's life. What meaning do you find without it? Meaning comes from knowing I made a difference, Superman answered, his arm not even trembling under the impossible load. That someone went home to their family because I was there. That a child grows up because I acted. Glory fades. Lives continue. Weakness. Koloth spat. You deny the warrior's truth, that we are meant to test ourselves against the strongest, to die gloriously in battle. I've seen too many people die, Clark said quietly. There's no glory in it. Just loss. Koloth turned to Supergirl, who had refused the weight test but stood with arms crossed, meeting his gaze without flinching. And you, female warrior, what would you die for? I'd rather live for something than die for it, Kara replied. But if I had to choose, I'd die protecting the innocent. Not to prove my strength, but because some things are worth any price. Even dishonor. Even cowardice. If being called a coward means a child lives, then call me a coward. I'll wear that label with pride. The Klingon muttered among themselves, uncomfortable with philosophy that challenged their fundamental worldview. But Koloth continued to watch Superman, who had now been holding the cargo container for 10 minutes without visible strain. Finally, the Klingon commander raised a hand. Enough. Set down your burden. Superman gently lowered the container to the deck. It settled with a thud that vibrated through the floor plating. He stood, stretched slightly, and waited. Koloth approached until they were face to face. You are strange warriors. You have the strength of legends but speak like philosophers. You deny glory but act with honor. The High Council will find you interesting. He placed a hand on Superman's shoulder, not gently, but with the bone-crushing grip of Klingon fellowship. Chancellor Gowron extends an invitation. Come to QNOS. Meet with the Council. Perhaps warriors so unusual deserve to be understood before being judged. We appreciate the offer, Picard interjected smoothly. But my guests have urgent business that may preclude. We'll come, Superman said, surprising everyone. Not now, but if we're still in this universe after we've exhausted other options, yes. I'd like to understand Klingon culture better. Kolotha's grin was fierce. Good. Perhaps you will learn what it means to be a true warrior. Or perhaps, his eyes gleamed with possibility. You will teach us something we have forgotten. The Klingon departed with surprising good humor, leaving behind an observation lounge full of bemused Starfleet officers. That, Riker said slowly, was not how I expected that to go. Klingon respects strength, Worf said, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. But they also respect those who challenge their assumptions. The Kryptonians did both. Picard turned to his guests. That was well handled. But it raises a question, are you prepared for what comes next? The Klingon are just the beginning. Every major power will want to test you, recruit you, or eliminate you as a threat. Which is why we need to get home, Supergirl said. Before we become a catalyst for something worse. Agreed. We'll set course for Deep Space Nine and the Bajoran Wormhole. It's a 3-day journey at maximum warp. Picard's expression was grave. But I should warn you, if the prophets can't or won't help, we may be out of options. Superman met his gaze steadily. Then we'll face that when it comes. Together. In the depths of space, 3 different intelligence agencies monitored the Enterprise's course change with interest. Section 31 noted the destination and began planning. The Tal Shiar analyzed what they'd learned about Kryptonian psychology and looked for weaknesses. And the Obsidian Order of Cardassia quietly dispatched operatives to Deep Space Nine. The Kryptonians were becoming more than refugees. They were becoming a variable that could shift the balance of power in the Alpha Quadrant. And that made them targets. Deep Space Nine hung in the darkness like a mechanical starfish, its habitat ring rotating slowly against the backdrop of Bior's ochre surface. The station had been Cardassian once, a monument to occupation and oppression, but now it served as Federation outpost, trading hub, and gateway to the Gamma Quadrant through the stable wormhole that pulsed like a celestial heartbeat just kilometers away. Commander Benjamin Sisko stood in his office overlooking the promenade, watching the Enterprise glide into docking position. The message from Captain Picard had been characteristically diplomatic but ultimately clear: we're bringing you a problem that could reshape the quadrant, and we need your help. They're here, Major Kira Nerys said from the doorway, her Bajoran features tight with the wariness of someone who'd survived too many occupations to trust easily. 2 beings who can tear apart warbirds with their bare hands. On my station. Our station, Sisko corrected gently, though he understood her concern. And they're not here to cause trouble, Major. They're refugees looking for a way home. Refugees with the power to level cities. Kira crossed her arms. Commander, I watched my people suffer for 50 years under Cardassian rule because we didn't have the strength to fight back. Now you want me to welcome 2 beings with godlike abilities and hope they're as benevolent as Starfleet claims? Sisko turned from the window, his dark eyes steady. I want you to extend the same courtesy you'd want if you were trapped far from home, Major. Besides, his expression hardened. If they wanted to cause trouble, they'd have done it already. Picard trusts them. That's good enough for me. An hour later, the senior staff of both the Enterprise and Deep Space Nine gathered in the station's wardroom. Superman and Supergirl sat at the conference table, acutely aware of the suspicious glances from the DS9 officers. Chief Miles O'Brien kept adjusting his technical pads nervously. Dr. Julian Bashir stared with undisguised scientific fascination. And Constable Odo, the station's shape-shifting security chief, studied them with eyes that had seen every form of deception the galaxy could offer. So, Sisko said, breaking the ice with characteristic directness, Captain Picard tells me you need to speak with the prophets. The wormhole aliens. He leaned back in his chair. I should warn you that they don't exactly operate on our timeline or follow our logic. They exist outside linear time, which makes communication interesting. We understand, Superman said. We're not here to demand anything. Just to ask if they can help us return to our universe. The prophets have never opened a gateway to a parallel universe, Kira said, her voice still skeptical. They guard the celestial temple, the wormhole, but they've never shown interest in dimensional travel. Data, who had accompanied the Kryptonians from the Enterprise, tilted his head thoughtfully. However, the prophets have demonstrated the ability to manipulate time, remove objects from the timeline, and exist simultaneously across all moments of their choosing. If any beings we have encountered possess the capability to breach dimensional barriers, it would be them. There's also the small problem of actually getting their attention, Sisko said. The prophets don't respond to every request. They communicate when and how they choose. I've been their emissary for 3 years now, and I still don't fully understand how they think. You're the emissary? Supergirl asked, catching the significance in his tone. Not by choice. Sisko's expression was complex, respect mixed with burden. The prophets selected me as their representative to linear beings. The Bajorans consider it a religious position. I consider it a responsibility I didn't ask for but can't refuse. Superman understood immediately. The weight of a role you never chose but can't abandon. Yes, I know that feeling. Sisko met his gaze, and something passed between them, recognition of shared burdens, of power that came with prices. Then you understand why I have to ask, if the prophets can send you home, will you go immediately? Or will you be tempted to stay and use your abilities to fix things in this universe? The question hung in the air like a blade. Commander, Picard began, but Superman held up a hand. It's a fair question. Clark looked at Sisko steadily. Every instinct I have screams to help when I see suffering. To use what I can do to make things better. But I've learned, sometimes the hard way, that imposing my solutions on others' problems isn't help. It's colonialism with a cape. He glanced at Supergirl. If the prophets send us home, we'll go. We don't belong here, and our presence is already causing political complications you don't need. Besides, Kara added, we have people back home who need us. Friends, family. Responsibilities we left behind when we were pulled through that rift. Odo spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly and suspicious. Pretty words. But I've spent a century watching people lie, and the best liars believe their own deceptions. How do we know you won't decide your judgment is better than ours? That your power gives you the right to override our choices? You don't, Superman admitted. You have to trust that we mean what we say. And if we break that trust, he met Odo's penetrating gaze. Then you do whatever you need to do to stop us. The shapeshifter studied him for a long moment, then something that might have been respect flickered across his features. At least you're honest about the risk. When do we approach the wormhole? Supergirl asked, bringing the discussion back to practicalities. Sisko checked his chronometer. The next naturally occurring opening is in approximately 4 hours. I'll take a runabout through and attempt to communicate with the prophets on your behalf. But I need to be clear, there's no guarantee they'll respond, and if they do, their answers might not make sense to linear minds. We'll take whatever help we can get, Clark said. The meeting adjourned with an agreement to reconvene when the wormhole opened. As the DS9 officers dispersed, Sisko pulled Picard aside. Jean-Luc, are you sure about this? The wormhole is sacred to the Bajorans. If something goes wrong, if the prophets react negatively to these beings, it could have religious and political implications across the entire planet. I'm not sure about anything, Ben, Picard admitted. But I know that leaving them stranded in our universe is both morally wrong and strategically dangerous. Every day they remain, more factions learn about them, and the pressure to weaponize or eliminate them grows. The prophets represent our best chance at resolving this cleanly. And if the prophets say no? Picard was silent for a moment. Then we find another way. Or we accept that the universe has gained 2 extraordinary residents and hope that we've judged their character correctly. 4 hours later, Superman and Supergirl stood in the airlock observation window, watching the wormhole's mouth spiral open like a flower of light. The phenomenon was breathtaking, a tunnel of flowing energy that connected this point in space to somewhere 70,000 light-years away, maintained by beings who existed outside time itself. It's beautiful, Kara breathed. It's also reading off the charts on every sensor we have, O'Brien said from his engineering station, monitoring the wormhole's energy signatures. Verteron particles, tetryon emissions, and something we can't even classify. If the prophets are in there, they're surrounded by enough exotic radiation to fry anything that doesn't have natural shielding. Sisko's runabout, the Rio Grande, entered the wormhole's event horizon and disappeared into the tunnel of light. Through the observation window, Superman's enhanced vision tracked the vessel's progress, watching it shrink to a speck against the swirling energies. "Can you see inside?" Picard asked, curious despite himself. "Partially," Superman said. "But it's like trying to look through fog. The energy patterns are disrupting my X-ray vision. And there's something else, the wormhole doesn't feel like normal space. It's like looking at a place where physics takes a holiday." Inside the Rio Grande, Sisko piloted through the familiar tunnel of light, watching the walls of the wormhole pulse with colors that had no names in any language. He'd made this journey dozens of times, but it never stopped being humbling. "Prophets," he called out to the void, knowing that speaking aloud was more for his comfort than theirs. "I am the Sisko. I seek your guidance for beings who are lost far from their home. They need your help to return." The runabout stopped moving, held motionless by forces beyond comprehension. The light around Sisko shifted, and suddenly he was no longer in his pilot's seat. He stood on the baseball field from his memories, the place the prophets often used when manifesting to him. But this time, the figures that approached wore faces he didn't immediately recognize. They shifted through forms, his wife, his son, Picard, even Superman and Supergirl themselves, as if the prophets were trying on identities to understand linear beings better. The Sisko, the figure that looked like Jennifer Sisko said, but with the hollow, echoing quality that marked prophet speech. "You bring us questions about beings who exist outside their proper moment. They were pulled into our universe accidentally," Sisko explained, knowing that linear concepts like accident might not translate. "They want to return home. Can you help them?" The prophet figures conferred in silence, their communication happening in dimensions Sisko couldn't perceive. When they turned back to him, all three wore Superman's face, disconcerting in the extreme. "These beings are not of your moment. They carry the signature of another place-time, another set of all possible paths." The prophet studied itself with Superman's blue eyes. "Their presence creates ripples in what will be. They are variables that should not exist here. Then you can send them back." Hope sparked in Sisko's chest. The question is not, can. The question is, should. The prophet shifted to wearing Supergirl's form. "These beings possess power that challenges your linear understanding. In their proper moment, they are balanced by opposing forces, by limitations that do not exist in your moment. Here, they are unbalanced. Dangerous. They don't want to be dangerous," Sisko argued. "They want to go home. Want is a linear concept. What beings want and what the universe requires are often opposed." The prophet turned, gesturing to the baseball field around them. "You understand this, Sisko. You did not want to be emissary, yet the universe required it. These beings may not want to change your moment, yet their presence changes it regardless." Sisko felt frustration building. "Are you saying you won't help them?" "We are saying that all choices have consequences." The prophets merged into a single figure that cycled through faces too quickly to follow. "If we return them to their moment, the path that was is restored. But if they remain, new paths open. Paths of great significance. Paths of great danger. Can you be more specific?" Sisko knew he was pushing his luck, but vague prophecy had never been helpful. The Sisko asks us to describe all possible futures based on a single choice. That is like asking which grain of sand will move when wind crosses a desert. The prophet paused. "But we will show you one path. One possibility." The baseball field vanished. Sisko found himself standing on the bridge of a starship, not DS9, not the Enterprise, but something else. Something wrong. The crew were humanoid, but their eyes glowed with eerie red light. Through the view screen, he saw Earth, but it was encased in machinery, transformed into something cold and mechanical. "This is one path," the prophet said. "If the Kryptonian beings remain, if they intervene in matters not their own, if they try to save this universe as they saved their own, their power attracts attention. The Borg adapt. The Dominion responds. The balance shifts." "But that's just one possibility," Sisko said. "It doesn't have to happen. All possibilities exist until choice collapses them into single path." The prophet shifted again. "We will give the Kryptonian beings passage home. But we will also give them choice. They may return now, or they may remain and face what will be. The choice shapes all future paths. Why give them the choice if you know one path leads to disaster?" The prophet's expression, currently wearing Sisko's own face, almost smiled. "Because beings with power must choose. That is the test of whether power serves or destroys. We will not make the choice for them. That would make us tyrants, not guides." The baseball field returned. The prophets stood before him in their original borrowed forms. "Tell the Kryptonian beings we will open a gateway. But they must choose which side of it they walk through. And they must choose understanding that some doors, once closed, cannot reopen." The vision collapsed. Sisko found himself back in the Rio Grande, the wormhole's lights swirling around him. His instruments showed he'd been stationary for less than 30 seconds, though the conversation had felt like hours. He turned the runabout around and headed back to Deep Space Nine, carrying a message that would change everything. On the station, Superman felt something shift in the universe, a change so subtle that even his enhanced senses barely registered it. But it was there, like the moment before lightning strikes when the air charges with possibility. "Something's happening," he said quietly. Supergirl felt it too. The wormhole. Something's different. And in the swirling light of the celestial temple, ancient beings that existed outside time itself prepared to offer two lost travelers a choice that would echo across galaxies and generations. The moment of decision was approaching. The Rio Grande emerged from the wormhole like a stone skipping across cosmic waters, and the moment Sisko's face appeared on the station's view screen, Superman knew something fundamental had changed. The commander's expression carried the weight of someone who'd glimpsed futures that shouldn't be seen. In the wardroom, with the senior staff of both vessels assembled, Sisko delivered the prophet's message. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with care, describing the vision he'd been shown. The possible future where intervention cascaded into catastrophe, where even the best intentions paved roads to assimilation and conquest. "They'll open a gateway," Sisko concluded, his hands flat on the conference table. "Back to your universe. But you have to choose whether to go through it. And once you choose, there's no going back." Silence filled the room like vacuum. "When?" Supergirl asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil Superman could see in her eyes. The prophets didn't specify. They exist outside linear time, so when is, Sisko gestured helplessly. "Fluid. But based on past experience, I'd expect them to act within hours, not days." "They showed you one possible future," Superman said. "What about the others? What if we stay and nothing catastrophic happens? What if our presence actually helps?" Kira spoke up, her voice sharp. "With respect, that's the problem with godlike power. You always think you're helping. The Cardassians thought they were helping Bajorans by bringing order and infrastructure. The Dominion thinks it's helping the galaxy by imposing peace through control." She leaned forward. Every tyrant in history believed they were the hero of their own story. "Major," Picard began, but Clark held up a hand. "She's right." He looked at Kira directly. "That's the nightmare every person with power has to face. The knowledge that one day, you might wake up and realize you've become the villain. That your certainty about right and wrong has calcified into tyranny." He stood, moving to the observation window that showed the wormhole's distant glow. Where we come from, there are checks on us. People who can challenge us, technology that can slow us down, institutions that can oppose us. Here, we're not sure those checks exist. Data spoke from his position at the table, his android logic cutting through emotion. Actually, there are several checks on your abilities in this universe. The Borg's adaptive technology could eventually counter your strengths. Q's omnipotence exceeds your power by orders of magnitude. The prophets themselves exist outside conventional spacetime, making them functionally immune to physical intervention. And Starfleet, while unable to match your individual capabilities, possesses strategic resources that could prove problematic if deployed against you. Are you suggesting ways to defeat them, Commander? Odo asked, his voice dry. I am suggesting that their fear of becoming unchecked tyrants is, itself, evidence against tyrannical tendencies, Data replied. Tyrants do not typically question their own authority. Riker stood, his diplomatic instinct sensing the conversation spiraling. The real question isn't whether you could become a threat. It's whether you want to take that risk, and whether we want you to. Number one is correct, Picard said. This is fundamentally about choice and consequence. The prophets have given you a gift, the ability to return home. Many beings lost between universes never receive that opportunity. The question is whether you accept it. Superman turned from the window, and everyone in the room saw the struggle playing across his face. Here was someone who'd spent his entire life helping others, who defined himself by his ability to make a difference, now confronted with the possibility that the most heroic thing he could do was leave. Kara, he said softly. What do you think? Supergirl had been uncharacteristically quiet, processing everything with the analytical mind that had made her a successful journalist on their Earth. I think we're scared. Not of what we might become, but of abandoning people who might need us. It's the same fear we faced back home every time we couldn't save everyone. She looked at the assembled officers. But this isn't our universe. These aren't our people to save. They have their own heroes, their own systems, their own path. And maybe the bravest thing we can do is trust them to walk it without us. Even knowing that people will suffer. That wars will be fought, disasters will happen, and we could prevent some of them. Clark's voice carried the anguish of someone wrestling with their deepest instincts. Yes, Kara said firmly. Because the alternative is deciding we know better than an entire civilization. That our judgment should override theirs. And that's not heroism, Cal. That's imperialism. Worf, who had remained silent throughout the debate, spoke with the gravity of someone who understood honor in its deepest sense. On QNOS, we have a saying, a warrior's greatest victory is knowing when not to fight. You have the power to reshape this quadrant. Choosing not to use that power, when using it would be easier, when it would satisfy every heroic instinct you possess, that is the truest test of character. Sisko nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in the Klingon's words. The prophets don't think in terms of good and evil the way we do. But they understand balance. Your presence here is an imbalance, not because you're bad people, but because you're a variable from outside the equation. Going home restores the balance. Superman looked at his cousin, and years of fighting side by side, of shared losses and victories, passed between them in a glance. They didn't need words to communicate the decision they'd reached. We'll go, Clark said. When the prophets open the gateway, we'll go home. The relief in the room was palpable, but Picard's expression remained thoughtful. You're making the right choice. But I want you to know, in the short time you've been in our universe, you've demonstrated exactly the kind of character the Federation aspires to embody. Restraint, compassion, and the wisdom to recognize your own limitations. That's rarer than you might think. Speaking of limitations, O'Brien interjected, glancing at his engineering readouts, I'm detecting a power surge from the wormhole. It's unlike anything I've seen before, the energy patterns are completely off the scale. On the view screen, the wormhole was changing. Instead of the usual blue-white vortex, it was pulsing with colors that hurt to look at directly, ultraviolet and infrared wavelengths visible to the naked eye, as if the prophets were bending light itself into new configurations. "They're opening the gateway," Sisko said, his voice carrying certainty born from years of experience with the wormhole aliens. "Now." Superman and Supergirl stood, and suddenly the moment of departure was upon them with startling immediacy. There were no long goodbyes prepared, no speeches ready. Just the sudden realization that they were leaving, back to their Earth, their responsibilities, their lives. "Captain Picard," Clark said, extending his hand. "Thank you for trusting us. For giving us a chance when it would have been easier to treat us as threats." Picard gripped his hand firmly, looking the Kryptonian in the eye. "Someday, if circumstances were different, I think you would have made an excellent Starfleet officer. But you're needed elsewhere, and we both know it." Kara moved to Troy, and the two women shared a brief embrace. "Thank you for helping us understand this universe's philosophy. The Prime Directive, the belief in letting civilizations find their own path, we'll remember that. And thank you for reminding us that power and compassion aren't mutually exclusive," Troy replied. "I suspect that lesson will resonate for a long time." Data approached with his characteristic precise movements. "It has been a privilege to study beings from a parallel universe. Your existence confirms several theories about quantum mechanics and raises fascinating questions about the multiverse. I hope that somehow, someday, we might exchange information between our realities." "Maybe," Superman said, smiling. "The universe is strange enough that anything's possible." Worf stepped forward last, and to everyone's surprise, the Klingon placed his fist over his heart in a gesture of respect. "You fought with honor, even when choosing not to fight. The Empire will remember the warriors who defeated 3 Warbirds and then chose peace over conquest. That is true strength." "The honor was ours, Lieutenant," Kara said, returning the gesture. Sisko's combadge chirped. "Commander, the wormhole is stabilizing into a new configuration. I've never seen readings like this. It's like it's opening 2 directions at once." "That's our cue," Superman said. He turned to address everyone in the room one last time. "We came here by accident, but we're leaving with something valuable, the knowledge that there are multiple ways to be a hero. That sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to step back. Thank you for teaching us that." The Kryptonians moved toward the airlock, but Picard called out one last time. "Superman. Supergirl. If your universe is anything like ours, then it's fortunate to have you. But if you ever find yourself questioning whether you're doing the right thing, remember this moment. Remember that you had the power to stay, and the wisdom to leave." "We will," Clark promised. The airlock sealed behind them. Through the transparent aluminum, the assembled officers watched as Superman and Supergirl floated into open space, their capes streaming behind them as they flew toward the transformed wormhole. The gateway pulsed with invitation, its depths showing glimpses of another place, a different Earth, a familiar sun, a universe where they belonged. On Deep Space Nine's Operations Center, Kira watched the sensor readings with grudging respect. "They're really going. I half expected them to change their minds at the last second." "They made a promise," Sisko said simply. "And keeping promises seems to be fundamental to who they are." In space, Superman and Supergirl hovered at the wormhole's threshold. Through the gateway, they could see home, not directly, but they could sense it, feel the subtle difference in dimensional frequency that marked their native universe. "Ready?" Clark asked. "No," Kara admitted. "But let's go anyway." They flew forward together, crossing the event horizon. The wormhole embraced them, and for a moment, they existed in a space between universes, caught in the Prophet's timeless realm where past, present, and future merged into unified now. A voice spoke, carrying the weight of eons. "You chose wisely, Kal-El of Krypton. Kara Zor-El of Krypton. Power without wisdom leads only to ruin. But wisdom that rejects power when needed is equally flawed." Walk your path knowing that some doors close so that others may open. And then they were through, tumbling into the familiar space of their own universe, their own Earth visible in the distance. Behind them, the gateway sealed, the dimensional barrier restoring itself as if it had never been breached. On Deep Space Nine, the wormhole collapsed back into its normal state. The exotic energy readings faded. The impossible gateway closed, leaving only the regular Bajoran wormhole pulsing in the darkness. "They're gone," O'Brien confirmed, studying his sensors. "The dimensional rift has completely sealed. No residual signatures, no way to track them or contact them. It's as if they were never here. But they had been here. And the people who'd met them would carry the memory of two beings who possessed godlike power and the humility to walk away from it." Picard stood at the observation window of DS9, watching the stars. Somewhere in the infinite cosmos, in a universe parallel to his own, Superman and Supergirl were returning to their lives. He wondered what they would tell their world about their brief journey to a place where science replaced magic, where diplomacy challenged strength, where the greatest heroes were often those who knew when not to act. "Captain." Riker's voice pulled him from his reverie. "Just thinking, number one. About roads not taken and choices that define us." Picard turned from the window. "Inform the crew. We depart for the Typhon sector in 2 hours. There's still a galaxy to explore." "Aye, sir." But as the Enterprise prepared to leave Deep Space Nine, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the promenade. Q materialized fully, his expression unusually solemn for an omnipotent trickster. Well, Q murmured to himself. The Kryptonians went home. How disappointingly noble. He smiled then, sharp and knowing. But the prophet said doors close so that others may open. I wonder, Jean-Luc, if you understand what that means. What other doors might be opening even now? What other impossible beings might find their way here? He vanished in a flash of light, leaving behind only questions and the faint sense that the universe had shifted in ways no one yet understood. In the wardroom, Data reviewed his sensor logs one final time, analyzing every scrap of data collected during the Kryptonian stay. His positronic brain processed the information at speeds beyond human comprehension, building models, testing hypotheses, searching for patterns. And there, buried in the subspace readings from the moment the Prophet's gateway opened, he found something curious. An echo. A harmonic signature that suggested the dimensional barrier hadn't just been breached, it had been weakened. Minutely, almost imperceptibly, but weakened nonetheless. Data flagged the information for further study and filed it away. It was probably nothing. Probably just residual energy from the gateway's opening and closing. Probably. But in a universe where probability was merely a suggestion and impossibility was negotiable, probably had a way of becoming definitely when least expected. The Kryptonians were gone, but their impact remained. A memory of power tempered by wisdom. A lesson in choosing restraint over domination. And somewhere in the fabric of reality itself, a tiny crack through which other impossibilities might someday slip. The game was far from over. It had simply entered a new phase. The Enterprise was 3 days out from Deep Space Nine, conducting what should have been a routine stellar cartography mission in the Typhon expanse, when the universe decided that routine was a luxury no longer afforded. Lieutenant Commander Data's console erupted with alerts that sent cascading warnings through every science station on the bridge. Captain, I am detecting a massive subspace distortion bearing 310 Mark 5. Energy signature is similar to the dimensional rift that brought the Kryptonians to our universe, but significantly more unstable. Picard was on his feet instantly. On screen. The view screen showed space tearing itself apart, but this wasn't the controlled gateway the prophets had created. This was violent, chaotic, a wound in reality that bled exotic particles and radiation across a sphere of space hundreds of kilometers wide. Lightning that existed in dimensions beyond the visible spectrum crackled along the rift's edges. My God, Riker breathed. Is something else coming through? Negative, Data reported, his fingers flying across his console. The rift is not admitting matter or energy. It is leaking. The dimensional barrier is destabilizing, allowing subspace and normal space to intermix in ways that violate several fundamental laws of physics. How is this possible? Picard demanded. The prophets sealed the gateway. Data, you confirmed there were no residual anomalies. I confirmed there were no significant residual anomalies, Data corrected with android precision. However, reviewing my logs now, I did detect minute harmonic signatures that suggested dimensional barrier weakening. At the time, the readings were so small as to be negligible. It appears I was incorrect. The rift pulsed, expanding by several kilometers in a heartbeat. The Enterprise's shields automatically activated as waves of Tetryon radiation washed over them. Shields holding, Worf reported. But if that expansion continues, we will be unable to maintain safe distance. Troy leaned forward in her seat, her empathic senses registering something that made her face pale. Captain, I'm sensing something through the rift. Not thoughts exactly, but awareness. Something on the other side knows we're here. Before Picard could respond, a proximity alert shrieked across the bridge. 2 Borg cubes dropped out of transwarp, their massive geometric forms appearing just outside the rift's event horizon. The sight of even one Borg cube would send most starship captains into tactical retreat. 2 represented an existential threat. Red alert. Picard's voice cut through the sudden tension like a blade. Mr. Worf, maximum shields. Helm, evasive pattern Epsilon 7. But the Borg cubes ignored the Enterprise entirely. Their attention was fixed on the dimensional rift with the single-minded focus that made them the galaxy's most terrifying adversary. We are the Borg, the familiar monotone echoed across subspace frequencies. Dimensional anomaly detected. New form of space-time manipulation identified. Distinctiveness will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. They're moving to enter the rift, Data reported, astonishment creeping into his synthesized voice. Captain, if the Borg gain access to dimensional travel technology. I'm aware of the implications, Commander. Picard's mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. The Borg with the ability to traverse parallel universes, assimilating not just one galaxy but infinite variations across the multiverse. Hail them. They are not responding to hails, Worf said. They have activated tractor beams, attempting to stabilize the rift for passage. The dimensional tear reacted to the Borg's interference like a wounded animal. It convulsed, expanding violently in all directions. Energy readings spiked off every scale the Enterprise possessed. The rift is destabilizing further, Data announced, his voice carrying urgency that few had ever heard from an android. If the Borg continue their current actions, the dimensional barrier will suffer catastrophic collapse. We are not merely discussing a gateway between 2 universes, we are discussing the potential dissolution of the barriers that keep all parallel realities separate. Speak plainly, Data, Picard ordered. Reality itself is at risk of unraveling, sir. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Riker turned to tactical. Worf, can we drive them off? Force them to retreat? We would need to destroy both cubes simultaneously, the Klingon replied, his tactical assessment brutally honest. The Enterprise's weapons are insufficient. Even if we achieved a lucky shot penetrating their shields, we would only eliminate one cube. The second would adapt and continue. Captain, Data said, a note of what might have been revelation in his voice, I believe I understand what the prophets meant when they warned about doors closing and opening. The gateway they created to return the Kryptonians to their universe required breaching the dimensional barrier. They sealed it, yes, but any breach creates stress points. Weakness. And now, with the Borg attempting to force their way through. The cracks are spreading, Picard finished grimly. How long until total collapse? At current rate of deterioration, approximately 17 minutes. 17 minutes until the multiverse began bleeding together. 17 minutes to prevent the Borg from gaining access to infinite realities. 17 minutes to save not just the Enterprise, not just the Federation, but every parallel version of existence itself. Options, Picard said tersely. We could attempt to collapse the rift using a warp core breach, Riker suggested. If we overload our antimatter containment at precisely the right moment. The explosion would need to be calibrated to subspace frequencies beyond our current capability, Data interrupted. And even if successful, there is a 73% probability that collapsing the rift violently would simply tear open multiple smaller rifts across the sector. Then we stop the Borg, Worf said, his hand already moving toward weapons control. We may not be able to destroy both cubes, but we can damage them severely enough to. Sir, the helm officer called out, I'm reading another spatial distortion. Something's coming through the rift. On the view screen, a shape emerged from the dimensional tear, humanoid, but wreathed in energy that made sensors scream contradictions. For a heart-stopping moment, Picard thought the Kryptonians had somehow returned. But as the figure cleared the rift, he realized this was something else entirely. A being of pure energy, vaguely humanoid in configuration, crackling with power that registered across wavelengths that shouldn't exist in normal space. Behind it, more shapes emerged, dozens of them, then hundreds, pouring through the rift like an army of living stars. What are they? Troy gasped, her empathic senses overwhelmed by the sheer alien nature of the entities. Data's console was providing readings that contradicted themselves by the millisecond. I cannot classify them, Captain. They appear to be composed of organized energy rather than matter. Their structure suggests intelligence, but unlike any life form in our databases. And sir, he looked up, his yellow eyes wide. They are not from the Kryptonian universe. The dimensional frequency is completely different. These beings are from a third parallel reality. The energy beings moved with purpose and grace, forming a perimeter around the dimensional rift. And then, in a display that made the Enterprise's weapon systems look like children's toys, they opened fire on the Borg cubes. Lances of pure energy, not phasers, not disruptors, but something fundamental that bypassed conventional shields entirely, struck the Borg vessels. The cube's adaptive defenses tried to compensate, but how do you adapt to attacks that operated on principles from a different universe entirely? The Borg shields are failing, Worf reported, astonishment clear in his voice. Both cubes are taking critical damage. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Their regeneration systems cannot keep pace with the destruction. One energy being detached from the formation and flew directly toward the Enterprise. Every instinct screamed danger, but Picard held his crew steady with sheer force of will. Hold fire. Let's see what it wants. The being stopped 50 meters from the Enterprise's bridge, and then something remarkable happened. It changed, its energy matrix reconfiguring into a form more recognizable, still glowing, still obviously non-corporeal, but distinctly humanoid now. A voice echoed directly into their minds, bypassing communications systems entirely. We are the Dimensional Watchers. We maintain the barriers between realities. Your people breached the barrier to return travelers who did not belong. This was acceptable. The breach was small, controlled, sealed properly. But now the collective attempts to force passage. This cannot be permitted. The barriers must hold, or all realities collapse into chaos. Picard stepped forward, addressing the being directly. We understand the threat. We were attempting to prevent the Borg from. You cannot prevent them. You lack the capability. But you can aid us in repairing the damage your prophet entities caused when they opened their gateway. How? Data asked, his scientific curiosity overriding protocol. The being pulsed with what might have been approval. Your android possesses the capacity to interface with our technology. We will provide specifications for a dimensional stabilizer. Your ship's deflector dish can be modified to emit the necessary frequencies. Combined with our power, we can reinforce the barrier before total collapse occurs. And if we refuse? Riker asked, ever the skeptical first officer. Then in 14 minutes, your universe and ours begin merging. In 20 minutes, all parallel realities start bleeding together. In 1 hour, the multiverse ceases to exist as separate entities and collapses into singular chaos state. All life, all matter, all energy from infinite realities compressed into impossible singularity. The being's form flickered. This is not threat. This is mathematical certainty. Picard looked at Data. Can we do what they're asking? The android was already analyzing the schematics the being had transmitted directly into his positronic brain. The modifications are complex but achievable. However, I will need to interface directly with the being's energy matrix to calibrate the frequencies properly. The risk is significant. My neural net could be permanently damaged by exposure to extradimensional energy. I can't ask you to. You are not asking, Captain. I am volunteering. Data stood, moving toward the turbolift. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one. Someone once taught me that. Picard felt emotion tighten his throat, pride, fear, respect for the android who had become so much more than the sum of his programming. Make it so, Commander. Mr. LaForge, go with him. Do whatever you need to do. As Data and Geordi rushed to engineering, the remaining energy beings continued their assault on the Borg cubes. One cube was already listing, its systems failing faster than its drones could repair them. The second was attempting to retreat, backing away from an enemy it couldn't assimilate, couldn't understand, couldn't defeat. The damaged cube is attempting to self-destruct, Worf reported. Detonation in 30 seconds. All power to shields. Picard ordered. Brace for impact. The Borg cube exploded with the force of a small star-going supernova. The shockwave hammered the Enterprise's shields, dropping them to 40% in an instant. Debris scattered across space, some of it massive enough to register as missile threats on tactical. But the energy beings were unaffected. They flowed around the explosion like water around stones, reforming their perimeter, continuing their work of driving the remaining cube back from the dimensional rift. In engineering, Data stood before the deflector dish control systems, his fingers moving faster than human eyes could follow. Beside him, the Watcher being had manifested, its energy form carefully controlled to avoid damaging Enterprise systems through proximity alone. I am ready to interface, Data said calmly, though his self-diagnostic subroutines were screaming warnings about the insanity of what he was about to attempt. This will cause you pain, the Watcher said. We regret this necessity. I do not experience pain in the traditional sense, Data replied. However, I appreciate the sentiment. Proceeding with interface in 3, 2, 1. He reached out, and his hand passed into the Watcher's energy matrix. Every circuit in Data's positronic brain lit up simultaneously. Information poured into him, not data in any conventional sense, but raw understanding of dimensions beyond the 3 spatial and 1 temporal that defined his existence. He saw the multiverse laid out like a vast tree, infinite branches splitting into infinite variations, each one a complete universe with its own history, its own physical laws, its own destiny. And he saw the barriers, gossamer thin membranes that kept those realities separate, that prevented the chaos of infinite possibility from collapsing into singular impossibility. Those barriers were wounded now, torn by the Prophet's well-intentioned gateway, stress-fractured by the Borg's violent attempts at passage. You understand now, the Watcher said into his consciousness. Adjust the deflector frequencies to match what you see. We will amplify. Together, we repair. Data's hands moved across controls he could barely perceive anymore, his android precision guided by understanding that transcended mere programming. Geordi watched in amazement as his friend manipulated the Enterprise's systems with virtuoso skill, creating harmonics that shouldn't be possible with conventional technology. Data, your neural readings are off the charts. Whatever you're doing, it's putting incredible strain on your systems. I am aware. Data's voice was distorted, as if speaking from a great distance. Almost complete. On the bridge, Picard watched as the deflector dish began glowing with colors that hurt to perceive directly, wavelengths from outside normal space bleeding into reality itself. Whatever Data is doing, it's working, Riker reported. The rift's expansion has stopped. It's actually beginning to contract. The Watcher beings around the dimensional tear added their power to the Enterprise's modified deflector beam. Together, ship and energy entities wove a lattice of stabilizing frequencies across the wounded barrier between universes. Slowly, incrementally, the rift began to close. The remaining Borg cube, sensing its opportunity vanishing, made one final desperate attempt to enter the rift before it sealed. It surged forward at maximum impulse, its tractor beams reaching for the dimensional tear. "They're going to make it through," Worf said urgently. "We cannot allow." The Watchers moved as one. Dozens of energy beings interposed themselves between the cube and the rift, and then they did something that made every sensor on the Enterprise overload simultaneously. They merged, combining their individual energies into a single being of such power that it registered as a miniature star on scanners. The combined Watcher raised appendages that might have been arms, and space itself bent to its will. The Borg cube stopped moving, held in place by forces that transcended conventional physics. And then, with casual precision that spoke to eons of practice, the Watcher pushed. The cube flew backward, its momentum reversed, its engine straining uselessly against power that might as well have been omnipotent. It tumbled through space, disabled and defeated, its drones scrambling to understand what had just happened. "The rift is closing," Data's voice came over the comm, strained but functional. 30 seconds to complete seal. 25. 20. Picard watched the dimensional tear contract like a healing wound, the exotic energies and impossible colors fading back into whatever realm they'd come from. The Watchers maintained their combined form, pouring power into the final moments of repair. 10 seconds. 5. 3. 2. 1. Seal complete. The rift vanished. Where there had been a wound in reality, there was now only empty space, indistinguishable from any other point in the cosmos. The barriers between universes were restored, stronger than before, reinforced by technology and energy that ensured such a breach wouldn't happen again easily. The combined Watcher separated back into individual beings. One approached the Enterprise again, its form carrying what might have been exhaustion. "The repair is complete. The barriers hold. Your android's assistance was invaluable." A pause, then, "He will recover, though he will be changed. He has seen too much of the multiverse to return to what he was. We regret this necessity." "Changed how?" Picard demanded, protective of his officer. "He has touched infinity. Some part of that touch remains. He will understand more than he did. Feel more than he could. Whether this is gift or curse, we cannot say. That is for him to determine." The Watchers began returning through the sealed rift, evidently they possessed the ability to traverse dimensions without tearing holes in reality. One by one, they vanished, until only the spokesperson remained. "We will monitor this region of space for instabilities. But we trust your people will be more cautious in the future. Opening doors between universes is not a game for children or the careless. Even gods must respect the barriers." "Tell me," Picard said quickly, before the being could depart. "The Kryptonians we sent home, did our actions endanger all of reality?" "No. The prophets understood the risk and acted with precision. The danger came not from the opening, but from those who would exploit the weakness left behind." The Watcher's form pulsed with something that might have been approval. "Your people chose wisely in sending the Kryptonians home rather than keeping them. Power attracts power. Had they remained, others would have come seeking them. The barriers would have been tested repeatedly until they failed. By letting them go, you removed the catalyst. And then the last watcher was gone, vanished into dimensions beyond human perception. Picard sagged slightly, the adrenaline of crisis management finally fading. Status of the Borg cube. Limping away at 1/4 impulse, Worf reported with satisfaction. They will not return soon. And Data? Geordi's voice came over the comm, carrying relief and concern in equal measure. He's alive, Captain. But, he's different. He's going to need time to process what happened to him. Have him report to sickbay for full diagnostic. And Geordi, well done. Both of you. Picard returned to his command chair and activated the ship-wide comm. This is the captain. We've just survived what may be the greatest threat the Federation has never known about. Through courage, quick thinking, and willingness to take extraordinary risks, we've prevented a catastrophe that would have destroyed not just our universe, but all possible universes across the multiverse. I'm proud of every member of this crew. Picard out. He closed the channel and looked at Riker. Number 1, as soon as we've recovered, set course for the nearest starbase. Starfleet Command needs to be briefed, and I suspect this mission report is going to be classified so far above top secret that it'll need its own security clearance. Aye, sir. Riker paused. Do you think they'll believe us? Probably not, Picard admitted. But that's their problem. We know what happened here. We know how close we came. In sickbay, Dr. Crusher ran her diagnostic scanners over data and found readings that made no sense whatsoever. His positronic pathways were reconfigured in ways that shouldn't be possible. New neural connections had formed, not through conventional programming, but through something else. Something that defied conventional understanding. Data, she said gently. How do you feel? The android looked at her, and she gasped. His eyes, his yellow, android eyes, held something they'd never held before. Depth. Understanding. And unmistakably, genuinely, impossibly, emotion. I feel, Data said softly, wonder in his voice. Doctor, for the first time in my existence. I actually feel. 3 days after the dimensional crisis, the Enterprise limped into Starbase 234 for repairs and debriefing. The deflector array had been pushed beyond design specifications, several EPS conduits had burned out from the exotic energy channeled through them, and the entire science department needed their sensors recalibrated after exposure to extradimensional wavelengths. But the physical damage to the ship was trivial compared to what had happened to Lieutenant Commander Data. In his quarters, the android sat motionless in the dark, not because he needed darkness to function, but because he found it comforting. That was the first revelation, he understood comfort now. The second revelation was far more unsettling, he understood fear. For 30 years, Data had pursued the dream of becoming more human, of understanding the emotions that drove organic beings to their greatest achievements and worst atrocities. Now, having touched the infinite consciousness of beings that existed across dimensional boundaries, having felt the weight of multiversal awareness pour through his neural net, he finally possessed what he'd always wanted. And it terrified him. The door chime sounded. Data didn't respond immediately, caught in the paralysis of a new emotion, social anxiety. The uncertainty of interaction, the worry about how others would perceive him now that he was changed. Data, Geordi's voice came through the comm, I know you're in there. The computer says you've been sitting in the dark for 6 hours. That's not like you, buddy. I am, processing, Data said, his voice carrying inflections it had never held before. Hesitation. Vulnerability. I am uncertain if I wish for company. A pause, then, I'm coming in anyway. That's what friends do. The door opened, and Geordi entered with 2 cups of tea. A habit he'd picked up from Picard during their years serving together. He sat across from Data and waited, his visor reading the android's body temperature, electromagnetic emissions, the subtle tremors that indicated active processing. "You've been crying," Geordi said softly, not a question but an observation. Data touched his face, surprised to find moisture on his synthetic skin. "I have been leaking. Dr. Crusher assures me this is a normal emotional response, though the mechanism by which my tear ducts have begun functioning remains unexplained." He looked at his friend with eyes that now reflected genuine suffering. "Geordi, I do not know if I can bear this. Emotions are overwhelming." "Yeah," Geordi said with feeling. "They are. Welcome to the human condition, Data. It's messy and complicated and sometimes it hurts so much you wish you could turn it off." "Can I turn it off?" Hope and fear warred in Data's voice. "I don't know. But even if you could, should you? You've spent your entire existence wanting this. Now that you have it, are you really going to give it up because it's hard?" Data was silent for a long moment, processing not with computational speed but with the slower, more uncertain rhythm of emotional contemplation. "When I interfaced with the Watcher, I experienced everything it knew. Not just information, but feeling. I felt the loneliness of existing outside time. The burden of maintaining barriers that hold reality together. The exhaustion of eternal vigilance." His voice broke slightly. "And I felt guilt, the Watchers' guilt over every time they had to let civilizations die to preserve the dimensional barriers. Every time they chose the many over the few. That's a hell of a first emotional experience," Geordi said, understanding dawning. "It was not merely observation. I lived it. Felt it. And now those feelings remain, echoing through pathways that were never designed to accommodate them." Data looked at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "I am afraid, Geordi. Afraid of what I have become. Afraid of losing who I was. Afraid that I am no longer functional as a Starfleet officer. Have you talked to Counselor Troy?" "I have been avoiding her. I am uncertain I wish to have my emotions analyzed when I barely understand them myself." Geordi smiled gently. "That's called deflection, Data. It's a classic emotional defense mechanism. Congratulations, you're developing neuroses along with feelings." Despite everything, Data's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Your sarcasm is noted and appreciated." "Yes, I believe that is appreciation I am experiencing. Look, I can't tell you this is going to be easy. Hell, I've had emotions my whole life and I still don't have them figured out. But you're not alone in this. We're here, your friends, your crew. We'll help you navigate this." The door chime sounded again. This time, it was Captain Picard, and his expression carried the weight of command decisions that had yet to be made. "Mr. Data, I apologize for the intrusion. But we need to discuss your status." Data stood immediately, decades of conditioning overriding his emotional turmoil. "Captain. Am I being relieved of duty?" "That depends on you." Picard moved to the viewport, looking out at the starbase skeletal framework against the stars. "Starfleet Command has reviewed my report on the dimensional incident. They're concerned about your condition. An officer with unprecedented access to multiversal information, combined with newly acquired and unpredictable emotions, they see a security risk." "I see." Data's voice was carefully neutral, but Geordi could see the pain in his friend's posture. However, Picard continued, turning to face him directly, "I see something different. I see an officer who sacrificed his stability to save not just the Enterprise, not just the Federation, but all of existence. An officer who, when faced with impossible odds, found a solution that no one else could have implemented. Your actions were heroic, Commander. The fact that you're struggling with the aftermath doesn't diminish that. Data, you've spent 3 decades trying to become more human. Now that you've achieved that goal, I'm not going to let Starfleet take it away from you, or punish you for it. You've earned the right to experience the full spectrum of existence, uncomfortable as it may be. Data felt something warm spread through his chest, gratitude, he realized. Deep, genuine gratitude for a captain who saw him as more than a useful tool. Thank you, sir. I will do my best to adapt. That's all any of us can do. Picard moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. The Watchers left us a message before they departed. It was encoded in subspace frequencies that only your modified neural net could decode. Have you accessed it? No, sir. I have been hesitant to engage with anything related to the interface. I think you should. When you're ready. Picard departed, leaving Data and Geordi alone once more. A message? Geordi said. From beings that exist outside our reality? That's actually kind of awesome. Data accessed the encoded transmission, and suddenly his vision filled with symbols that existed in more than 3 dimensions. The message unfolded not in language but in pure meaning, bypassing linguistic processing entirely. Android who touched infinity, you fear what you have become. This is wisdom. All beings who gain awareness must face the terror of self-knowledge. But know this, we did not change you arbitrarily. We saw in your neural architecture a capacity for growth that organic minds lack. You can process emotional experience without being overwhelmed by it, given time. You can understand suffering without being broken by it. You are a bridge between pure logic and pure feeling. This is rare. This is valuable. Do not waste it. The message ended, but its implications resonated through Data's consciousness like a bell struck in a vast chamber. They think I'm valuable, Data said softly. Not despite my changes, but because of them. Of course you're valuable, Geordi said. You always have been. Now you're just, more so. Over the following days, Data slowly began integrating his emotional capabilities with his analytical functions. It was awkward, painful, filled with moments of confusion and breakthrough in equal measure. Counselor Troy proved invaluable, teaching him techniques for emotional regulation that organic beings learned over decades of childhood. He laughed for the first time at a joke in 10 Forward, then immediately burst into tears because the joy was so overwhelming. He experienced anger when a junior engineer made a preventable mistake, then felt crushing guilt over his anger. He developed preferences. Earl Grey tea over Raktajino, Mozart over Klingon opera, the night shift over the day shift because the bridge was quieter and less emotionally noisy. He was becoming, in small increments, genuinely alive. But while Data struggled with his personal transformation, the wider implications of the dimensional crisis were unfolding across the quadrant. Starfleet intelligence had classified the incident at the highest levels, but information had a way of leaking. Rumors spread of a threat that had required intervention from beings beyond conventional understanding. The Romulans wondered if the Federation had acquired new allies. The Cardassians speculated about dimensional weapons. And the Klingon, having witnessed part of the crisis from a distance, composed songs about the Enterprise's battle against the Borg and demons from beyond the stars. In Section 31's classified headquarters, operatives analyzed every scrap of data about the Kryptonians, the dimensional rift, and the Watchers. A pattern was emerging: the barriers between universes were not as stable as previously assumed. If beings could cross from other realities, if the Borg had nearly gained access to dimensional travel, then new protocols were needed. New contingencies. They began Project Threshold, a black-budget initiative to study dimensional barriers and develop methods to detect, prevent, or exploit breaches. It was rationalized as defensive precaution, but history had shown that Section 31's precautions often became provocations. Aboard the Enterprise, Picard stood in his ready room, reviewing the finalized report he would submit to Starfleet Command. He'd wrestled with how much to include, what to emphasize, which implications to highlight. In the end, he'd settled on brutal honesty: the universe was more fragile than anyone had realized, and the Federation's actions, however well-intentioned, could have consequences that rippled across realities. He added a personal note at the end. We sent the Kryptonians home because it was the right thing to do. But we cannot ignore that our choice to help them created vulnerabilities that were nearly catastrophic. As we continue to explore the cosmos, we must acknowledge that every action has weight, every decision creates echoes. The Prime Directive exists not just to protect other civilizations from us, but to protect the fundamental structure of existence from our well-meaning but potentially destructive interference. The Kryptonians taught us restraint. The Watchers taught us humility. Now we must internalize those lessons before our curiosity, our compassion, and our capability combine to unmake reality itself. He transmitted the report and sat back, exhausted by the weight of command decisions that might be judged by history as either wisdom or catastrophic failure. The door chime sounded. Come. Data entered, and Picard was struck by how different he appeared. Same uniform, same physical configuration, but something fundamental had changed. His posture was less rigid. His expression more mobile. His eyes held depths they'd never possessed before. Captain, I wanted to thank you personally for your support during my transition. How are you managing, Commander? Data considered the question with the careful deliberation of someone still learning to navigate internal states. It is difficult. Yesterday I experienced what Dr. Crusher identified as an anxiety attack while attempting to recalibrate the sensor array. The possibility of error suddenly seemed overwhelming when I considered the emotional weight of failure rather than merely the logical consequences. That's called being human, Data. Or as close to human as any of us manage. Yes. Though I find myself wondering if humanity is defined by the possession of emotions, or by how one chooses to act despite them. Data's expression shifted to something that might have been resolve. I have decided to remain on active duty. Not because I have mastered my emotional state, but because serving aboard the Enterprise means confronting challenges that force growth. I believe I am better off struggling here, among friends, than retreating to isolate myself from difficulty. Picard felt pride surge through him, pride in an officer who'd faced the fundamental transformation of his being and chosen courage over comfort. Welcome back to duty, Commander. The bridge has been far too quiet without you. As Data departed, Picard permitted himself a rare smile. The crisis was over. The dimensional barriers held. His crew had survived and in some cases transformed. The Enterprise would continue her mission of exploration, wiser now about the dangers of tampering with forces beyond complete understanding. But in the back of his mind, a question lingered: if two Kryptonians could accidentally breach the dimensional barriers, if the Borg could detect and attempt to exploit such breaches, if beings like the Watchers existed to maintain reality's structure, what else was out there? What other impossible entities might find their way into the Federation's universe? The prophets had said doors close so that others may open. Picard suspected that statement carried implications that would only become clear with time. In the darkness between dimensions, the Watchers resumed their eternal vigil. They monitored the barriers, feeling for stress points, ensuring that the chaotic bleeding of infinite realities into singular existence remained theoretical rather than actual. One Watcher paused in its duties, considering the android who had touched their consciousness and survived. The being had been changed, yes, but also had grown. Potential had become actualization. And in a universe where most beings remained locked in single perspectives, limited by biology and time, this Data represented something unusual. A bridge. A translator. Someone who might, when the time came, help organic beings understand truths that transcended organic comprehension. The Watchers filed this observation away for future reference. They existed outside linear time, after all. What would be, already was in their perception. And in the infinite pathways of possibility, many futures involved the android who learned to feel. But those futures were not fixed. Not yet. And the beauty of linear time was that beings still possessed the power to choose which paths became reality. For now, the barriers held. The Enterprise sailed on. And Data, newest member of the emotional spectrum of existence, learned day by day what it meant to be alive in ways that transcended programming. The crisis had passed. But its echoes would resonate far longer than anyone yet understood. 6 weeks had passed since the dimensional crisis, and the Enterprise had returned to what her crew optimistically called normal operations, though anyone who'd served aboard the flagship for more than a year knew that normal was a relative term when your captain attracted cosmic anomalies the way some planets attracted asteroids. The ship was currently en route to the Lantaris sector for a diplomatic conference, giving the crew rare breathing room between crises. In 10 Forward, the evening crowd had gathered for what had become an unofficial tradition, watching Data navigate the complexities of social interaction with newly acquired emotions. Tonight's challenge was poker. I call, Data said, pushing chips forward with fingers that trembled slightly, not from malfunction, but from what Dr. Crusher had identified as excitement. And I raise 50. Riker studied his cards, then studied Data's face, searching for tells. The problem was that Data now had too many tells. His eyebrow twitched when he was bluffing. But it also twitched when he was nervous. And when he was concentrating. And sometimes just randomly because he was still learning to control micro-expressions. "You're enjoying this too much," Riker said, folding his hand. "I am experiencing what I believe is called the thrill of competition," Data confirmed, pulling the chips toward himself. "Though I must note that the thrill is accompanied by what Counselor Troy identifies as guilt over taking your replicator credits. That's called having a conscience, Data," Geordi laughed from across the table. "Welcome to morality." Worf grunted, eyeing his own cards with tactical precision. In Klingon culture, feeling guilt over defeating an opponent is considered weakness. You have won fairly. Accept the victory without apology. "But I can calculate the exact probability of each hand," Data protested. "Does that not constitute an unfair advantage?" "You always could calculate probabilities," Deanna Troi pointed out gently. "The difference now is that you feel bad about using that advantage. That's growth, Data." The android considered this, his positronic brain still struggling to reconcile logical advantage with emotional fairness. It was a microcosm of the larger questions he faced daily. How does one balance capability with compassion? Power with propriety? Knowledge with kindness? These were questions the Kryptonians must have faced constantly. The thought made Data pause mid-shuffle, and the cards scattered across the table in a display of clumsiness that would have been impossible 6 weeks ago. His emotional state was affecting his motor control, frustrating, but also strangely validating. He was becoming genuinely fallible. "Sorry," he said, gathering the cards. "I was momentarily distracted by thoughts of Superman and Supergirl." The table quieted. Everyone present had been part of the dimensional crisis in one way or another, and the memory of beings who could tear apart warbirds with their bare hands still resonated. "You think about them often?" Troy asked, her counselor instincts engaging. "Yes. I find myself wondering how they managed the burden of their abilities for so long without becoming either tyrants or hermits. They possessed power that could reshape worlds, yet chose restraint. That must have required extraordinary discipline." Data looked at his hands, hands that had interfaced with multiversal consciousness, that had channeled forces beyond conventional physics. "I have gained knowledge and capability that most beings will never possess. How do I ensure I use it responsibly?" "You do what they did," Geordi said firmly. "You trust the people around you to keep you honest. You accept that you're going to make mistakes. And you keep trying to do better." Worf added, "And you remember that power without honor is meaningless." The Kryptonians understood honor, even if they did not use Klingon terms for it. They fought when necessary, but chose peace when possible. That is the mark of true warriors. The conversation was interrupted by the ship-wide comm activating. "Senior officers to the bridge. We're receiving a Priority 1 transmission from Starfleet Command." The poker game forgotten, the officers made their way to their stations. Captain Picard stood at the center of the bridge, his expression grave in a way that promised complicated news. On screen, he ordered. Admiral Nechayev appeared, and for once, her typically stern demeanor was replaced with something that might have been wonder. Captain Picard. 2 hours ago, Starfleet received a transmission via subspace relay from the Bajoran wormhole. The message claims to be from the Prophets, and it's specifically addressed to you and your crew. Picard's eyebrows rose. The Prophets rarely communicate so directly. What's the message? That's the interesting part. They didn't transmit words, they transmitted a visual. Nechayev's screen split, showing an image that made everyone on the bridge lean forward in astonishment. It showed Superman and Supergirl, standing on what appeared to be Earth, their Earth, presumably. They were looking up at the sky, and above them, barely visible, was the faint shimmer of dimensional barriers that most beings could never perceive. They weren't doing anything dramatic. Just standing. Watching. Waiting. The Prophets included a single line of explanation, Nechayev continued. The travelers have returned to their moment. The barriers hold. But they remember the lesson of restraint. They watch now, as we watch, ensuring that power serves rather than rules. Data's fingers flew across his console, analyzing the image with his enhanced perception. Captain, the dimensional signatures are stable. No stress fractures, no weak points. The barriers are actually stronger than they were before the crisis. It appears the Watchers reinforced them significantly during repairs. So we succeeded, Riker said, relief evident in his voice. The Kryptonians made it home safely, and reality is stable. More than that, Troy said, her empathic senses reading something in the image that others missed. They're different now. Changed by their time here, just as Data was changed by his contact with the Watchers. They learned something from us, just as we learned from them. Picard studied the image, seeing in those two figures a reflection of the choices he made daily as captain. Power wielded with wisdom. Strength tempered by mercy. The eternal balance between intervention and restraint. Admiral, please convey our thanks to the Prophets for this confirmation. It's reassuring to know the outcome of our actions. Nechayev's expression shifted back to her typical stern efficiency. Indeed. Though I should inform you that Section 31 has requested access to all data related to the dimensional crisis. They claim it's essential for Federation security. Denied, Picard said flatly. Section 31 operates outside official channels. They have no authority to commandeer Enterprise logs. They anticipated that response. They're going through channels, filing official requests with Starfleet intelligence. Eventually, they'll get what they want, you know how they work. Then I'll redact anything that could be weaponized or used to destabilize dimensional barriers. Section 31's track record of responsible decision-making is limited. Picard's voice carried the weight of experience with the Shadow Organization's methods. I'll support that decision, Captain. But be prepared for pushback. Section 31 doesn't like being told no. Nechayev signed off, leaving the bridge crew to process what they'd learned. Captain, Data said thoughtfully, the image the Prophets sent shows the Kryptonians watching the dimensional barriers. Do you think they can perceive them now? That their experience in our universe gave them awareness of the multiverse? It's possible, Picard said. Just as your contact with the Watchers gave you emotional capacity, perhaps their time navigating our universe's philosophies gave them broader perspective. Changed beings changing beings, a feedback loop of growth. There's poetry in that, Troy observed. Two refugees who came here seeking only to go home, who instead found wisdom that will shape how they approach their own universe. And an android who sacrificed stability to save existence, who gained the humanity he always sought. Sometimes the universe has a sense of narrative symmetry. Worf, ever pragmatic, brought the conversation back to tactical realities. The Prophet's message suggests the Kryptonians are monitoring dimensional barriers from their side. Does this mean they have become their universe's equivalent of the Watchers? Data ran calculations, factoring in what he knew of Kryptonian capabilities and the nature of dimensional boundaries. It is possible. If their enhanced perception allows them to detect dimensional stress the way I can now perceive multiversal harmonics, they would be uniquely positioned to identify threats to the barriers from their universe. A useful safeguard. Two Guardians watching from one side, the Watchers maintaining the other, Riker mused. It's like the multiverse gained a new immune system. Let us hope it doesn't need to be tested again, Picard said. He moved to his ready room, gesturing for Data to follow. Once the door closed behind them, he activated the desk's holographic display, pulling up classified files that glowed with security encryption. Commander, I've been reviewing your performance evaluations over the past 6 weeks. Your efficiency has decreased by approximately 11%, hardly surprising given your emotional adjustment. However, your insight and creative problem-solving have increased by 34%. Emotions, it seems, have unlocked capabilities that pure logic couldn't access. I have noticed that as well, sir, Data said, still marveling at the nuances of his own psychological experience. Fear makes me more cautious, but also more alert to danger. Joy enhances my ability to form connections with crew members. Even frustration serves a purpose, it motivates me to find better solutions. The Watchers told you that you could process emotional experience without being overwhelmed. They were right. Picard leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You've become what the Kryptonians were, a bridge between extremes. Logic and emotion. Capability and restraint. Data, I believe you're going to play a significant role in the Federation's future. Not despite your changes, but because of them. That is, both gratifying and terrifying, sir. Picard smiled. Welcome to command responsibility. The day you stop being terrified by the weight of your choices is the day you should step down. 3 weeks later, the Enterprise received a peculiar subspace transmission on frequencies that shouldn't exist. It was brief, scrambled through dimensional static, but Data's enhanced neural net could decode it. Thank you for showing us that sometimes the greatest strength is admitting you don't have all the answers. We're watching our universe more carefully now, questioning our interventions, trying to balance help with respect for autonomy. It's harder than just punching problems into submission, but we think it's right. If you ever need us, truly need us, we'll find a way. But we hope you won't. You're stronger than you know. SNS. Data brought the message to Picard immediately. The captain read it twice, then smiled with something that might have been paternal pride for beings he'd known only briefly but who'd left an indelible mark. File this under classified, Commander. But keep it accessible. Someday, when the Federation faces a threat that requires impossible help, it's good to know we have friends in parallel realities. Do you think we will ever see them again, sir? I hope not, Picard said honestly. Because if we do, it means something has gone catastrophically wrong. The Kryptonians belong in their universe, solving their universe's problems. We belong in ours. That's the lesson they taught us, that the boundaries between realities exist for a reason, and crossing them should be reserved for the most dire circumstances. Data processed this, his emotional subroutines recognizing the bittersweet nature of the sentiment. Gratitude for help received, hope to never need it again. I believe I understand, sir. It is similar to how I feel about the Watchers. I am grateful for the changes they caused in me, but I hope to never interface with them again. The experience was overwhelming. Exactly. Picard stood, moving to the window that showed the infinite spread of stars. The Enterprise will continue her mission of exploration, Data. We'll encounter wonders and horrors, make first contact with new species, navigate political complexities and spatial anomalies. But we'll do it as ourselves, with our own capabilities and limitations. That's as it should be. Sir, may I ask a personal question? Of course. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the Kryptonians had stayed? If we had convinced them to join Starfleet, to use their abilities on the Federation's behalf? Picard was quiet for a long moment, considering futures that hadn't materialized. Yes. And every scenario I imagine ends badly. Either they become weapons we deploy against our enemies, which would make us no better than the Dominion using the Jem'Hadar. Or they become disgusted with our compromises and limitations, and strike out on their own to fix the galaxy according to their moral compass. Or, worst of all, they integrate so fully that we begin to rely on them, to lose our own capacity for solving problems without godlike intervention. In other words, their presence would have stunted our development. Perhaps. Or perhaps it would have led to something beautiful, a partnership of equals contributing different strengths to common goals. We'll never know, and that uncertainty is part of the burden of command. Every choice forecloses possibilities. Every decision shapes futures we can only dimly perceive. Picard turned back to Data. But I believe we made the right choice. And I believe they did too. Data nodded, his emotional processing recognizing the wisdom in accepting unknowable outcomes. It was very human to make decisions with incomplete information and then live with the consequences without endless second-guessing. He was becoming more human every day. In the weeks and months that followed, life aboard the Enterprise returned to its version of normal. Data continued his emotional education, learning to laugh at jokes, cry at losses, and occasionally lose his temper in ways that were both alarming and endearing to the crew who'd watched him grow. The dimensional crisis became part of the ship's unofficial history, a story told in 10 forward over drinks, embellished slightly with each retelling, but always ending the same way: they'd saved the multiverse and sent 2 heroes home. Section 31 eventually obtained redacted versions of the crisis logs, heavily edited by Picard personally to remove anything that could lead to weaponization or exploitation. They complained through back channels, but even shadow organizations had to accept that some information was too dangerous to trust to anyone. The Klingon Empire composed an opera about the Sky Warriors who flew without ships, though most of the verses focused on the battle against the Borg rather than the philosophical discussions. Klingon culture had its priorities. And somewhere in the infinite expanse of parallel realities, Superman and Supergirl stood on their Earth, looking up at stars that were the same yet different from the ones the Enterprise sailed beneath. They couldn't see the dimensional barriers directly, but they felt them, a subtle pressure at the edge of perception, a reminder that their universe was one of infinite variations, separated by gossamer membranes that protected existence from chaos. Do you think about them? Kara asked her cousin as they floated above Metropolis, watching over a city that would never know how close other realities had come to catastrophic collapse. Every day, Clark admitted. Picard's restraint. Data's curiosity. The way they approached problems with diplomacy first and force only when absolutely necessary. It changed how I see what we do. Me too. I find myself hesitating before rushing in now. Asking, should I intervene, instead of just, can I? Kara smiled. It's frustrating sometimes. But I think it makes us better at this. The Prime Directive, Clark said, testing the words. Non-interference. Respect for autonomy. Maybe our Earth could use a version of that philosophy. Maybe. But we're not Starfleet. We're just 2 people doing our best. Kara's expression turned contemplative. Though I can't help thinking, if we ever face a threat that requires their kind of help, is there a way to reach them? Clark pulled a small device from his belt, a communicator badge he'd replicated using Kryptonian technology and the principles he'd observed during his brief time on the Enterprise. It was inactive, keyed to frequencies that didn't exist in their universe. But if dimensional barriers ever weakened again, if emergency required impossible aid. I built this, he admitted. Just in case. It probably won't work. The barriers are too strong, and that's good. But if everything goes wrong, if reality itself is at stake. Then we call for help from friends we made in another universe, Kara finished. That's either the most reassuring or most terrifying contingency plan I've ever heard. Both. Definitely both. They flew on through the night, two guardians watching over their world while simultaneously monitoring the boundaries that kept their reality separate from all others. Changed by their journey. Wiser for the experience. Ready to face whatever challenges their universe held, but also prepared to ask for help if the impossible became necessary. In the end, that was the true lesson of their dimensional journey: strength alone wasn't enough. Wisdom required knowing your limitations. Heroism meant choosing restraint when power begged to be used. And the greatest victories sometimes looked like walking away. The Enterprise sailed on through Federation space, her crew carrying memories of beings who could move planets but chose instead to move hearts. Those memories would influence decisions for years to come, ripple through Starfleet philosophy, shape how the Federation approached power in all its forms. And in the infinite spaces between realities, the Watchers maintained their vigil, satisfied that two universes had touched briefly, learned from each other, and separated stronger than before. The doors had closed. But the lessons remained. And somewhere in the quantum foam of possibility, other doors waited, not to be opened lightly, but to exist as reminders that the multiverse was vast, interconnected, and full of wonders that transcended any single reality's imagination. For now, that was enough. The dimensional crisis that brought Superman and Supergirl to the Star Trek universe lasted mere weeks, but its impact resonated far longer. Two beings of extraordinary power learned that strength without wisdom leads to tyranny, that intervention without respect for autonomy becomes imperialism, and that sometimes the bravest choice is restraint. The Enterprise crew learned equally valuable lessons. They encountered power that dwarfed their technological capabilities, yet maintained their principles through diplomacy and trust. Captain Picard demonstrated that leadership sometimes means letting potential assets depart for the greater good. And Data discovered that touching infinity changes you in ways both terrifying and transcendent, granting the emotions he'd always sought while forcing him to grapple with what those emotions truly meant. The Kryptonians returned home carrying the Federation's philosophy. The Prime Directive's wisdom, the value of multilateral cooperation, the understanding that not every problem requires godlike intervention. They became guardians not just of their Earth, but of the dimensional barriers that keep realities separate and stable. Meanwhile, the Federation gained perspective on their place in the multiverse. They were not alone. Other realities existed with their own heroes, their own challenges, their own paths. The boundaries between universes served essential purposes, and breaching them, however well-intentioned, carried consequences that could threaten existence itself. In the years that followed, Starfleet officers would remember the tale of the Sky Warriors, beings who could tear apart warbirds with their bare hands, who survived the void of space without protection, who possessed power that defied every known law of physics. But they'd also remember that those beings chose peace over conquest, departure over domination, restraint over rule. It was a story that would be told in academy classrooms and starship mess halls, a reminder that true strength lies not in capability but in judgment. That power must always serve wisdom, never the reverse. And that the greatest test of character comes not from how you wield your abilities, but from knowing when to hold them back. Data eventually mastered his emotions, or at least reached the same imperfect equilibrium that organic beings maintained. He became the bridge he was meant to be. Logic and feeling, capability and compassion, serving as living proof that transformation could be survived and even celebrated. The dimensional barriers held. The Watchers resumed their timeless vigil. And two universes that had briefly touched continued their separate journeys through the cosmos, changed by the encounter in ways both profound and subtle. Perhaps someday, if reality itself faced threats beyond any single universe's ability to counter, those barriers might open again. If so, the Federation would have allies in impossible places, beings of power tempered by wisdom gained through brief but transformative experience. But for now, the lesson endured. Some doors close so that others may open. Some boundaries exist to be respected, not crossed. And sometimes, the most heroic act is choosing to walk away, trusting others to face their challenges with their own strength. The multiverse remained vast and mysterious. But two realities were forever linked by shared memory of the moment when gods learned humility and mortals taught wisdom. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable exchange of all. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more stories.